Chapter 1454. Qi Yu and Ji Wuxiang looked at each other when they saw that the chief was neither servile nor overbearing. The reaction of the chief was out of their expectations. His moral integrity really made their eyes light up. However, Qi Yu and Ji Wuxiang did not appreciate this. After all, the other party was refuting them. Their faces darkened and they said, "The 100 Faces Star-Lord is good at the art of transformation. It is very likely that he will become anyone around you. If you protect him like this, you will be the one who will suffer in the future. The 100 Faces Star-Lord is not a kind person." The 100 Faces Star-Lord's heart twitched and he was furious. These two fellows kept on slandering him. It was really detestable. "Shut up. Since when is it up to you to tell me what to do? I have seen everything. Who can deceive my eyes?" The 100 Faces Star-Lord said confidently in the tone of the chief. Qi Yu and the 100 Faces Star-Lord looked at him with disdain. He was indeed a mortal who was ignorant and arrogant. If it was something else, perhaps they would give him face. However, this was a serious matter. Moreover, the 100 Faces Star-Lord had tricked them. This kind of provocation was absolutely intolerable. Therefore, the two looked at each other tacitly and understood each other's thoughts. They made a move. In the eyes of people like them, family and country were not worth mentioning. After all, they were people from different eras. Back then, they were existences that surpassed countries. They were supreme and would not change too much with the changes of time and environment. Wait. Suddenly, the Empyrean fairy, who had been silent all this time, opened her mouth. The two turned to look at her suspiciously. Their eyes were deep and they sneered. "You still want to stop us?" "No." The Empyrean fairy smiled meaningfully. Her eyes lingered on the chief and she was quite playful. The 100 Faces Star-Lord's heart trembled. He looked at the Empyrean fairy unkindly and muttered in his heart, "Did this woman see through something?" He had crossed swords with the Empyrean fairy several times, so he knew how powerful she was. He knew very well that after the Battle of Tianshan, Tang Zheng had died in battle and the Empyrean fairy had fallen into Qi Yu's hands. Now, she was Qi Yu's captive. He didn't want to let the other party speak, so he preemptively said, I was wondering who it was." "So it's a prisoner. Now it seems like you've recognized the thief as your father, right?" His sarcastic words made one feel ashamed. The Empyrean fairy did not get angry. Instead, the smile on her face grew wider. When Qi Yu saw this, his heart skipped a beat and he revealed a curious expression. The Empyrean fairy would not speak without thinking. She must have seen through something. Ji Wuxiang also thought of this, so the two of them simultaneously stopped the idea of fighting. They wanted to see what the Empyrean fairy saw. "Making such a big fuss shows that you have a guilty conscience. If you weren't so aggressive, I wouldn't have suspected you. But your aura is too strong, so I can't help but feel suspicious," the Empyrean fairy said calmly. "What guilty conscience?" "Nonsense," the 100 Faces Star-Lord said fiercely, hiding his guilt. The Empyrean fairy was unmoved. "I've met the real chief several times. I don't know him very well, but I do know him relatively well. When faced with such a situation, his instinctive reaction is definitely not like this. Am I right?" The Empyrean fairy turned to ask Ji Wuxiang. A bolt of lightning flashed through Ji Wuxiang's mind as he came to a sudden realization. How could he have overlooked such a serious flaw when dealing with the upper echelons all year round? Although the chief was in charge of the central government and had great authority, there were many things in his bones that would never change. For example, his fear of super experts. He shouldn't be so confident and fearless. This was indeed not his style. The mysterious maiden of the 9 heavens woke Qi Yu up with a single sentence. Her following words caused everyone to turn pale with fright as they cried out in alarm. "Actually, you are the celestial master of 100 forms." The Empyrean fairy pointed at the chief with her finger, hitting the nail on the head. "Ah!" Qi Yu and Ji Wuxiang exclaimed in a low voice, their eyes fixed on the 100-faced Star Lord. The 100-faced Star Lord is the best at transformation. I've already experienced it before. You turning into the chief is the most flawless plan, and no one will find out. Monopolizing power is not only good for hiding yourself, it's also good for your schemes, isn't it? The Empyrean fairy's words tore off the 100-faced Star Lord's disguise and exposed his sinister intentions. His expression was no longer so righteous and fearless. The subtle reaction of the chief had an unusual meaning in the eyes of Qi Yu and Ji Wuxiang. The two almost immediately believed the Empyrean fairy's words. This chief was an impostor, and his real identity was the 100-faced Star Lord. This was the only way to explain all of this. They had thought too simply of the 100-faced Star Lord. He wouldn't be satisfied with becoming the chief's subordinate. That would be too low-level. Replacing him would be the wiser choice. 100-faced Star Lord, your disguise has been seen through. What's the point of continuing? Your courage hasn't shrunk at all. Qi Yu mocked. The 100-faced Star Lord's expression was extremely gloomy. He glared at the Empyrean fairy and said through gritted teeth, "Woman, you're ruining my plans again. One day, I'll kill you." The Empyrean fairy was unmoved. "Then you'll have to escape death from those two first." "Escape death? I don't need to escape. Instead, it's the two of you who will die without a burial ground." The 100-faced Star Lord was still arrogant, as if he didn't put them in his eyes at all. Ha ha ha. Qi Yu and Ji Wuxiang laughed at the same time. If it was said that they were a little afraid of the chief's identity before, they didn't have any now. 100-faced Star Lord, from the moment you did this, no, from the moment you had that thought, you were destined to die. Ji Wuxiang said with a murderous aura. The 100-faced Star Lord asked suspiciously, "What did I do to make you want to kill me so much? Now that things have come to this, what's the use of denying?" The two of them didn't listen to the 100-faced Star Lord at all. After all, he had wanted to deceive them just now. At this moment, they naturally wouldn't believe anything the 100-faced Star Lord said. The 100-faced Star Lord rolled his eyes speechlessly. What did he deny? He was the 100-faced Star Lord. Was there a need to deny it? But seeing that the two of them didn't want to hear more, the 100-faced Star Lord's arrogance and fierceness were aroused. With a fierce expression, he said, "Since that's the case, then die." He raised his big hand. Ka ka ka, the sound of something opening rang out. Then, everyone saw that the sturdiest house automatically opened to two sides, revealing a pitch-black hole. A rumbling sound came from the hole. A beam of light rushed out and shone into the sky. It was like a sword of light, directly piercing through the dense black clouds. What is that? Qi Yu and Ji Wuxiang opened their eyes wide. A giant gradually rose from the hole. With a whoosh, it flew into the sky and floated in midair. The giant's body was made of the toughest metal, full of strength and beauty, giving people a feeling of invincibility. "That's King Kong!" the Empyrean fairy shouted. She recognized it at a glance, but this King Kong was different from the one she had seen before. It seemed to be an upgraded version. King Kong was a mecha warrior. It was driven by the inner core of a demonic beast, and its strength was not inferior to that of a cultivator expert. After the 100-faced Star Lord took control of the situation, he obviously didn't settle down to enjoy life. Instead, he thought of all kinds of ways to improve his overall strength. This giant mecha was one of his first choices. She believed that the upgraded King Kong would be completely different from before. Her eyes lit up as she secretly rejoiced. Perhaps the opportunity she had been waiting for was coming. "You dare to use a pile of scrap metal to make a fool of yourself? 100-faced Star Lord, I really overestimated you." Qi Yu didn't put King Kong in his eyes at all. The 100-faced Star Lord revealed a mocking expression and laughed wildly. "Qi Yu, you really are stubborn. You don't know how to keep up with the times. The power of technology is far more powerful than you can imagine. Let me tell you, its name is King Kong. This is the ultimate, most perfect version. Soon, you will be able to experience its power. The Hundred-Faced Star-Lord waved his hand and gave the order. With an unstoppable momentum, King Kong spewed out 2 balls of blue flames from its feet. With a whoosh, it attacked Chi-Yu. The distance seemed to be very far, but in the blink of an eye, a ball of fire was spat out from King Kong's fist. With a piercing sound, it drew a long line in the air. Even the falling rain couldn't extinguish the ball of fire. The ball of fire flew directly in front of Chi-Yu. The light from the fire illuminated him, making his expression look somewhat ferocious. Insignificant skill. Chi-Yu's sword flashed and flew out, accurately hitting the ball of fire. Boom! The ball of fire exploded, and a huge shockwave spread out in all directions. Chi-Yu was also affected. His body shook a few times, but in the end, he held on and didn't take half a step back. However, the power of the ball of fire made him frown slightly. This was more powerful than a normal bomb. This King Kong was indeed worthy of its reputation. But so what? It was a dead object after all. How could it be a match for Chi-Yu? Who? Another beam of light descended from the sky, directly splitting the clouds and scattering the rain. Even the air was split into 2 sides, as if it was attacking Chi-Yu with an earth-shattering momentum. Not only Chi-Yu, but the other 2 also felt the same pressure and aura. They saw clearly what was going on. It turned out that the beam of light had been firmly grasped in King Kong's hand. It was like a light sword, bursting with great power. Chi-Yu, aren't you proficient in sword arts? Have a taste of technology. How does this light sword taste? The Hundred-Faced Star-Lord smiled proudly. Light sword. Chi-Yu softly repeated these 3 words. Isn't this the same as sword chi? What's the big deal? Sword chi was also a form of energy. When it was released from the sword, it had a high requirement for the sword wielder. Chapter 1455. King Kong looked down from above. Not only could it fly freely, its body was even larger and majestic, causing people to feel reverence when they looked at it. It held a beam saber in its hand, and the huge beam saber split the sky, cutting through the rain curtain, and slashing towards Chi-Yu with an earth-shattering momentum. In front of King Kong, Chi-Yu was like a baby facing a giant. However, when Chi-Yu raised the War Soul sword high up, everything changed. Although he was still as tall as before, his aura was completely different. It was as if he had grown a lot taller and was not any weaker than King Kong. Whoosh! The beam saber landed in front of Chi-Yu, and the air crackled as heat waves surged into the sky. 9 Shaman Sword Technique. Chi-Yu shouted in a low voice. The War Soul sword shone brightly and its sword intense sword. It even emitted a buzzing sound as it was extremely excited. The War Soul sword also yearned for this battle. Swish! 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 The sword light rose and thousands of sword lights shot out from the War Soul sword, wrapping around the War Soul sword. At this moment, the War Soul sword suddenly grew larger and finally turned into a huge sword. Although it was slightly smaller than the beam saber, it was already a peerless divine sword as it slashed towards the beam saber. Clang! 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 Sparks flew in all directions, as if meteors were sprinkling down from the sky, covering the dark sky. The rain was completely blocked out by the sword light, forming a huge vacuum. Chi-Yu and Kong Kim were fighting back and forth in this huge space. They were having a great time killing each other. The others stared at this battle without blinking, not willing to miss any details. Especially the strength displayed by King Kong, which greatly exceeded their expectations. The power of technology could not be ignored. The 100 Change Star-Lord's eyes shone brightly. He had made the right move. If not for King Kong restraining Chi-Yu, he would have been in a situation where he would definitely lose. In fact, the 100 Change Star-Lord understood Chi-Yu very well. After all, they were from the same generation. Chi-Yu had unified the Ninely tribe. It could be seen that not only was his skill strong, his strength was unquestionable. These two were indispensable. Otherwise, in that environment back then, it would have been impossible for him to fight for the world. Now that Chi-Yu was his enemy, he naturally did not dare to underestimate him. As for whether King Kong could withstand Chi-Yu, that was a 50-50 chance. He was not as confident as he had vowed. King Kong only knew how to kill and fight, he did not have his own thoughts. However, Chi-Yu was different. Through this intense battle, he gradually gained new insights and finally understood the power of technology. The battle prowess of the Vajra was comparable to that of a cultivator who had just reached the threshold of the Mahayana realm. However, the most important thing was that the beam saber complemented the Vajra, and the power it could unleash was extremely terrifying. But the only drawback was that the beam saber was too big and was not flexible enough. For example, the battle soul could suddenly change its size and could often catch the enemy off guard and win. The war soul sword flashed and a ray of sword light separated. Like a wild horse that had escaped its reins, it whizzed behind King Kong and slashed towards his back. Boom! With a loud bang, a fine crack appeared on the back of the King Kong. The sword light did not penetrate it. The material of the King Kong was one of the hardest materials in the world. It was not so easy to completely break through. King Kong did not feel any pain at all. Although a crack appeared on its back, its battle prowess was not affected at all. The beam saber fell from the sky and slashed towards Chi-Yu's head. Pooh! The air was cut in half and a blazing heat wave rushed towards Chi-Yu, as if it was going to ignite his hair. Chi-Yu's eyes burst out with a terrifying light and he roared, "Break!" Shwa! The battle soul sword moved from bottom to top, carrying an unparalleled aura. It slashed diagonally onto the beam saber and sparks flew in all directions. The battle soul sword slid along the beam saber. Kacha! Finally, the battle soul sword slashed onto the beam saber's hilt. The sharp edge of the sword cut King Kong's wrist. In the sparks, King Kong's appearance was somewhat sinister. The corner of Chi-Yu's mouth curled up and he sneered proudly, "This is the time." Pooh! The tip of War Soul's sword turned and directly cut deeper into the crack on King Kong's wrist. Half of his arm immediately fell off. The beam saber instantly lost the support of its energy. The soaring beam saber disappeared, leaving only the hilt in half of his arm. This, the 100 Faces Star Lord turned pale. He did not expect King Kong to be defeated like this. Without the beam saber, King Kong's power was greatly reduced. The 100 Faces Star Lord's face was sinister. He gritted his teeth and said, "King Kong, continue to attack." King Kong seemed to have been activated. Its eyes burst out with a terrifying light. Its remaining hand clenched into a fist and fiercely swung towards Chi-Yu's head. Insignificant skill. Break for me. Chi-Yu's attack succeeded and his confidence increased. The battle soul sword hit King Kong's wrist again. King Kong's entire body was incomparably hard. However, the wrist was the joint between the two mechanical parts. It was a natural weak point. Chi-Yu discovered this clue in the continuous battles. That was why he identified this weak point and gave it a fierce blow. As expected, it was a hit. In the blink of an eye, both of King Kong's wrists were broken. Without his wrists, King Kong was equivalent to a cripple. Its power was greatly reduced. So. Suddenly, two foreign objects appeared from behind King Kong. With the sound of breaking through the air, two missiles flew out from behind it and shot straight towards Chi-Yu. Chi-Yu somersaulted in the air and dodged the missile attack. However, the missile had already locked onto him and actually turned back in midair and continued to fly towards him. It's as if it has eyes. Chi-Yu looked at the missile in surprise and clicked his tongue in wonder. But in fact, he did not put the missile in his eyes. The battle soul sword shone brightly and instantly turned into a huge sword, slashing towards the missile in the air. Boom boom. Two earth-shattering sounds rang out as the missile was split apart by the battle soul sword. Then, it exploded with a loud bang. The explosive wave soared into the sky and directly created two large holes in the black clouds that filled the sky. It was like two empty eye sockets that looked down at everything below. It was extremely terrifying. The rain that filled the sky disappeared under this hole, forming a vacuum. This scene firmly attracted everyone's attention, including the huge capital. Almost everyone's gaze was focused on it. The momentum of this battle was too great, and the geographical location was so special. It was hard not to attract attention. The capital had already reacted at the fastest speed possible. All sorts of alarms resounded through the sky, as if they wanted to tear everything apart. Countless police lights and armed personnel quickly gathered here from all directions. As for the ordinary people, they were all dumbstruck as they looked at this scene in disbelief. In their consciousness, this was the center of power, high and mighty. How could anyone dare to move on top of Tai Sui's head? All the forces in the capital wanted to use all their means to find out what was going on. Chapter 1456. The man walked briskly, and with every step he took, water splashed in all directions. He whistled as he walked past the red lights and green lights, heading towards the center of the battle. The road was already crowded with people, and they all stopped to watch. Some were shocked, some were curious, and some were excited. Their round eyes were wide open as they stared straight into the distance. The man walked through the crowd like a fish in water. He was not affected by the crowd at all. Not long after, he left most of the people behind and arrived at his destination. The place was completely under martial law, and the area had been cleared into a vacuum. Other than the armed military police, there were no other ordinary people. These people were nervous and busy, but they did not seem to notice the uninvited guest at all. He openly walked through the layers of blockade and directly came to the center of the battle. At this moment, in this huge courtyard house, even the military police could be counted on one hand. Everyone was whispering, as if discussing what to do. But there was no doubt that this area had become an impenetrable fortress that would not tolerate irrelevant people entering or leaving. But this person was an exception. He stopped and observed for a moment, then said, "Chiyu has really regressed. You have to take so long to deal with a dead thing." If other people heard these words, they would be shocked and think that he was boasting shamelessly. But Chiyu did not think so when he heard these words. This person was indeed qualified to say these words. Because he was the inner demons. The inner demons had promised Tang Zheng that they would help him deal with Chiyu. But he had always stayed in the capital, and Chiyu had never set foot in the capital, so the two sides had never really confronted each other. But this time, Chiyu had taken the initiative to come to the capital. Because of the promise, the inner demons naturally would not sit idly by. Although the inner demons knew that Tang Zheng was dead, since he had promised Tang Zheng, he would not change his promise because of his life or death. "Tang Zheng, this is the last thing I'm going to do for you. You should be able to rest in peace now that you're dead." The heart demon muttered to itself in a low voice. The battle in the sky had undergone a huge change. Having lost its beam saber and missiles, King Kong had lost all of its attacking power. Another sword light flashed, and the War Soul sword cut across the King Kong's thigh. With a kacha sound, the King Kong staggered and fell to the ground. Before it could get up, Chiyu leaped and flew to the top of its head. The War Soul sword was placed behind its neck. Chiyu was full of arrogance and said fiercely, "Destroy them completely." Whoosh! Sparks flew wherever the sword passed, and King Kong's head drooped down bit by bit. Finally, with a whoosh, it fell from the air and smashed heavily onto the ground. Boom! Coincidentally, the head hit the only intact house, causing the others to retreat in fear. The multiform star sovereign turned pale as he watched this scene. He did not expect Vajra to be defeated so quickly, without the slightest hesitation. He looked up into the sky and saw Chiyu's proud expression. His heart skipped a beat, and an ominous premonition instantly enveloped his entire body. This is not good. I should escape. Saving my life is more important. 100 Changes Star Lord was nervous. He subconsciously looked outside the field. In the distance, the black mass of military police was ready to attack at any time. This was the only thing he could rely on. He had to rely on these people to delay the other party's footsteps. Only then could he create a chance for himself to escape. However, whether or not he would succeed was unknown. After all, Ji Wuxiang had not made a move yet. 100 Changes Star-Lord could not figure out how deep his water was. Everyone, listen up. Kill these murderers without mercy. 100 Changes Star-Lord's voice was full of energy. His deep and loud voice spread to every corner and everyone's ears. This was the bugle call to charge. In an instant, everyone swept over like a tide. Although they knew that these people were powerful, they still charged forward without hesitation. This was their natural duty. Once the order was given, there was no room for retreat. In fact, in a flash, they did not even think about this problem. Ji Wuxiang and Qiyu did not care about these people at all. Qiyu seemed like he was going to start a massacre, but Ji Wuxiang made a move first. He walked in the air, his feet moving in a strange direction. Waves of mysterious power were triggered by him. Above the 9 heavens, the mighty power of the stars penetrated layers of black clouds and directly shrouded this space. Ji Wuxiang formed a seal with his hands. As he opened and closed them, he let out a long roar like muffled thunder, seal. Everyone seemed to have encountered an invisible wall. They hit it hard and made muffled sounds, but they could not take another step forward. There was a hubbub of voices. Many people did not know what was going on, but they continued to charge forward as if they wanted to use their strength to break the invisible barrier. Who knew, in the end, it was proven that their efforts were in vain. The meaningless struggle was not effective at all. Ji Wuxiang was arrogant. He looked down at the feudal people below and said disdainfully, "You want to break my barrier with this bit of power? You overestimate yourself." Who knew? Before he could finish the word, power, it was as if someone was strangling his throat, and he could not say another word. His eyes were wide open as he stared straight down at the sea of people below. A person had actually crossed the barrier he had set up so easily, as if he was taking a stroll in the park. How was this possible? This was the only thought left in his mind. How did this person do it? How could this person cross the barrier that I set up so easily? He was puzzled and looked as if he had seen a ghost. Another question immediately popped up in his mind. This person was definitely not an ordinary person. Who was he? Was he an accomplice of the 100 Faces Star-Lord? Why had he not heard anything about him? Many questions came one after another like an avalanche, causing him to have a hard time coming up with a solution. The other party seemed to have noticed his distress. He raised his head and glanced at him mysteriously. Ji Wuxiang even saw a playful smile on the other party's face. This was a provocation, and it was full of meaning. This provocation caused Ji Wuxiang's heart to jump because he suddenly realized that the other party was not overestimating himself and seeking death. The other party had calmly crossed the barrier that he had set up, which proved his strength. No, why does this person's face look so familiar? Where have I seen him before? Ji Wuxiang immediately saw the clue. Huang Ziang. With a flash of inspiration, he finally recognized him. Isn't this Huang Ziang who has become a puppet? Why did he become so lively and full of spiritual qi? There must be a mystery behind this. Chapter 1457. Huang Ziang. Everyone stared at him without blinking. How did he become so powerful? Ji Wuxiang and Qiyu looked at each other and saw the shock in each other's eyes. No one knew that this person was no longer Huang Ziang, but the inner demons. The inner demons raised his head and smiled meaningfully. He looked at the two people in the air provocatively and said, "Qiyu, we meet again." He directly called Qiyu by his name. Moreover, his tone shocked everyone. This voice was like thunder in Qiyu's ears. It shook his heart and he cried out in shock, You are the inner demons." The inner demons sneered, "Qiyu, your eyes are not blind." After a slight pause, the inner demons continued, back then, you used all kinds of sinister methods and even used a cage to imprison me, but in the end, I still regained my freedom. This is the will of heaven, ha ha ha. His words were full of pride. This arrogant laughter was like a steel needle that ruthlessly pierced Chi-Yu's heart. He said with a livid face, the will of heaven, you really have the nerve to put gold on your face. I didn't kill you back then, but now you may not be so lucky. The inner demon said disapprovingly, is that so? I don't think so. Could it be that you think that after tens of thousands of years, you can kill me now? Chi-Yu didn't say a word, but his silence was equivalent to an answer. He really couldn't kill the inner demons. It was like this tens of thousands of years ago, and it was still like this now. The others stared at Chi-Yu curiously. They didn't expect that there would be a day when he would be pushed to such a state. Wasn't he high and mighty, the hero who galloped the world tens of thousands of years ago? Who was this inner demons? They could actually do this. All eyes subconsciously fell on the inner demons. That mysterious aura did not match his ordinary appearance. The inner demons enjoyed the feeling of being the center of attention. It was as if they had returned to tens of thousands of years ago, when he was once again the center of attention, the center of attention, the center of attention, and the center of attention. He looked around calmly, but his gaze was as proud as that of an invincible General Sheng. He slowly opened his mouth and said, in your eyes, perhaps Chi-Yu is high and mighty and invincible. But today, I want to tell you that Chi-Yu is not the person who will always stand at the top of the altar. His position is not unbreakable. These words were sonorous and forceful, like a heavy hammer pounding on everyone's hearts. The shock in everyone's hearts could be imagined. Everyone looked at the two of them suspiciously. They could vaguely guess what was going to happen, and some were even looking forward to it. This was because what was about to happen would definitely be extraordinary. As expected, the inner demons walked towards Chi-Yu leisurely. But with every step he took, his body would rise up a notch. It was as if there was an invisible staircase beneath his feet, lifting him up. Chi-Yu's pupils shrank as he stared at the inner demon's feet. If it was before, although Chi-Yu was afraid of the inner demons, it was more because the inner demons couldn't be killed, and his own fighting strength was not that high. But now, the strength displayed by the inner demons was clearly different from the information he had received. This seemingly effortless act of walking up the stairs actually required a high level of skill. Especially under the dual pressure of Chi-Yu and Ji Wuxiang, the fact that he was able to remain so calm and composed was enough to explain everything. In a flash, the inner demons had already walked in front of Chi-Yu. Chi-Yu and Ji Wuxiang looked at him with uncertainty. Except for Chi-Yu, even Ji Wuxiang didn't know much about the inner demons. But seeing the inner demon's aura and Chi-Yu's reaction, he could infer that this person was not ordinary. Ji Wuxiang subconsciously gathered all his energy, ready to attack. Once the inner demons made a move, he would definitely make the first move to gain the upper hand and not give his opponent a single chance. This was the experience he had gained after experiencing the incident with Tang Zheng. At that time, he didn't think highly of Tang Zheng. Later on, Tang Zheng caused him so much trouble. All of this was the serious consequence of underestimating his opponent. Ji Wuxiang would never make the same mistake twice. Chi-Yu stared at the inner demons without blinking, guarding against him. The inner demons had clearly come prepared, which was why they had appeared in public. Chi-Yu had to be on guard. Now, in this world, the only person who had a long-cherished wish for the inner demon, or could be said to be the enemy of the inner demon, was Chi-Yu. How could Chi-Yu let his guard down? When 100 Change saw the inner demons, his eyes suddenly lit up. Not only had he heard of many glorious deeds of the inner demons, but he had even witnessed it with his own eyes. Naturally, he knew how powerful the inner demons were. Moreover, in the prehistoric heavenly tomb, the battle between the inner demons and the Yellow Emperor's remnant soul had left a deep impression on 100 Change. Although 100 Change was also very curious about how the inner demons could be resurrected, he knew that this was his only chance of survival. The inner demons seemed to be able to see through people's hearts. He turned his head and smiled meaningfully at 100 Change. 100 Change's heart trembled. Only then did he remember that the inner demons were the best at seeing through people's thoughts. There was no way he could hide his thoughts from the inner demons. With that thought in mind, the 100 Transformations Star-Lord looked directly at the inner demon. The inner demons turned his head, no longer paying attention to him. His gaze swept past Qiyu, Ji Wuxiang, and the Empyrean fairy. Someone has been looking for her. The inner demons pointed at the Empyrean fairy and said. The Empyrean fairy's expression was normal, but Qiyu's pupils shrank. You're related to the Emperor of Heaven? Emperor of Heaven? The inner demon sneered. I don't know any Emperor of Heaven. Then who's looking for her? Qiyu was full of suspicion. The inner demon smiled mysteriously and didn't tell the truth. You'll know when the time comes, she said indifferently. He knew that Tang Zheng had faked his death, so he naturally wouldn't reveal it. Qiyu's heart was heavy. He snorted and said provocatively, the great inner demons actually dare to play riddles with me. This isn't your style. The inner demons was unmoved. Why would I play riddles with you? I'm here for revenge. Back then, you and the Yellow Emperor worked together to imprison me. I've remembered this grudge for tens of thousands of years. Now, it's time to pay it back. If I were given another chance, I would still do the same. No, Qiyu suddenly denied himself. I'll do everything I can to kill you. I believe that there will always be a way to kill a freak like you. Freak. Ha ha ha. The inner demons laughed wildly. His smile was sinister and gave people a very frightening feeling. I'm a freak in your eyes, but that's only because your skills aren't as good as mine. Humph, I've seen through you hypocrites long ago. Whether it's you or Qiyu, you're all jackals of the same tribe. From now on, there's only me, the inner demons, in this world. The inner demons was very emotional. He said without stopping, I'll let you know what it's like to be ruled by a freak. I'll let you see how much power and influence a freak like you can have. The inner demons became more and more excited as he spoke. His cheeks turned red. Obviously, he had been oppressed for too long. Tens of thousands of years ago, he was suppressed by two powerful forces. Later on, he was suppressed in the bronze coffin. No matter what, the inner demons had lived a very sullen life. He didn't want to at all. Now that he had a chance to live again, he naturally wanted to follow his heart. He had been hospitalized since the day before yesterday, and had undergone surgery yesterday. He really didn't have the energy and time to update. Today, he finally had the chance to dictate it, but someone else typed it out and updated it. He still had to stay in the hospital for a few days. To read the latest novel, please visit the website. Chapter 1458. The inner demons looked crazy and ferocious. Qiyu and Ji Wuxiang were puzzled by his secretive words. They didn't know why he was deliberately mystifying things. In fact, the inner demons didn't know that Tang Zheng had faked his death at first. They had always thought that he was dead after hearing rumors from the outside world. But he still didn't forget his promise with Tang Zheng and decided to fulfill it. A few days ago, he returned to Tang Zheng's base camp on a whim. He planned to tell Tian Chanzi and the others about his decision. He didn't want them to think that he had failed to keep his promise. The inner demons were good at reading other people's minds. After Tian Chanzi and the others met the inner demons, it was impossible for them to hide the fact that Tang Zheng had faked his death. The inner demons knew the whole story. The inner demons suddenly understood. He couldn't help but sigh at this boy's courage and carefulness. He had actually taken advantage of the situation and set up such a shocking trap. Since Tang Zheng had deceived everyone, he naturally wouldn't spread the news. He didn't want to ruin Tang Zheng's plan. In addition, he also decided to act in advance. Otherwise, he would definitely be scolded by Tang Zheng the next time they met. It just so happened that Qiyu was making a scene in the capital. The inner demons couldn't sit still anymore and stepped forward bravely. The inner demons was completely enraged by Qiyu's words about freaks. His eyes were red, and he sneered. Now, accept the wrath of a freak. The inner demons took a step forward. It seemed ordinary, but the scene around them immediately changed dramatically. Everyone's heart was shaken. A sense of fear grew from the depths of their hearts. They widened their round eyes. Not only were their final targets, Qiyu and Ji Wuxiang, affected, but even the Empyrean Fairy and the 100 Faces Star Master were no exception. The fear in the depths of their hearts was like a flood that broke through a dam. It continuously rushed out, causing their faces to suddenly change color and their breathing to become rapid. In their eyes, the scene in front of them had undergone an earth-shattering change. Moreover, what each of them saw was completely different. This was the power of the inner demon's attacks. Not only could they attack multiple targets at the same time, but they could also attack each target differently. Because everyone's fear was different, their attacks had to be tailored. In the Empyrean Fairy's eyes, the scene before her eyes flashed, and she returned to a world filled with the fragrance of flowers. Fairy Qi lingered in the air, and red-crowned cranes danced in the air. It was truly a fairyland. A little girl was playing in this wonderland, accompanied by a fairy-like woman. Her face was full of love, and she would whisper to the girl from time to time, showing her motherly love. Suddenly, the girl was startled and raised her head. Her eyes glowed with white light like ice, and ice crystals instantly condensed all over her body. The woman's expression changed greatly. She hurriedly protected the girl and tried to circulate her energy to dissolve the ice. However, an ice crystal like a sharp sword suddenly shot out from the girl's body. Puff! The ice crystal pierced through the woman's chest. Blood dyed her entire body red and sprinkled in this paradise filled with birds and fragrant flowers. The world quickly turned blood red. The Empyrean Fairy's breathing was rapid, and her whole body was drenched in sweat, as if she had just been fished out of the water. This was the deepest fear in her heart. She had deliberately forgotten it for many years, but she did not expect that it would be evoked by the inner demons today. Her whole body trembled, and she could barely stand. Ji Wuxiang saw a completely different scene. It was a dark house, and he was kneeling in front of an old man. Suddenly, a cold light flashed in his hand, and a short sword pierced directly into the old man's heart. The old man died with his eyes wide open. He stretched out his trembling finger, and with the last of his strength, he weakly shouted 2 words, "Evil, disciple." Ji Wuxiang stood up, and the corner of his mouth curved into a cruel smile. The hand holding the sword was still trembling, and he could only hear him whispering to himself, "Don't blame me, blame yourself for not believing in the celestial chess that I created." Ji Wuxiang's face was deathly pale. He had never lost his composure like this before. The scene in front of him evoked the restless fear in his heart. His ascension to the throne of the Azure Dragon Hall's High Lord seemed justified, but in reality, it was an act of treason. All of this was because the old Azure Dragon Hall's High Lord did not agree with the celestial chess that he created. He thought it was nonsense and deliberately mystifying. No matter who stood in his way, he would not show mercy, even if it was the master who raised him and taught him. This was a secret that no one knew. Seeing this scene again, his feelings in his heart could be imagined. If all of this were to be made public, then he would bear infamy for eternity. How could he be immortalized because he created the celestial chess? Qiyu saw an ancient battlefield, where countless experts were killing each other. And Qiyu was facing an equally mighty and powerful figure, the Yellow Emperor. After a bitter battle, Qiyu was defeated. The Battle of Zhuolu was the deepest fear in his heart. Because he was utterly defeated and completely erased. All of his efforts were in vain. This was his deepest fear. Qiyu was not afraid of anything and was number 1. In fact, he was still deeply afraid of the Yellow Emperor. Because he had seen his opponent's strength. The Yellow Emperor had defeated him fair and square. This was an absolute strength. He had no choice but to be afraid. 100 Faces Star Sovereign's face was deathly pale. When he saw Buzhou Mountain being hit, although he kept saying that he did not regret breaking Buzhou Mountain, he was not even afraid at all. But in reality, after doing all of this, he was indeed afraid. He was not afraid of anything, but he also knew that he had made a huge mistake. This fear stayed in his heart, took root and grew into the source of his fear. No, no, he kept talking to himself as if he was sleep-talking. His fists were clenched tightly. At the scene, the only ones who were not affected by the inner demon's attack were the mechanical warriors. They were not living beings, but a group of steel monsters. Therefore, spiritual attacks did not work on them. However, without Hundred Faces Star Sovereign's orders, they were like steel puppets, motionless. The inner demons looked at their changing expressions and was extremely pleased. His actual combat strength was not as good as Qi Yu's. Even if he had Huang Xiang's body, it was difficult for him to reach Qi Yu's level. But his spiritual attacks were too powerful. In just a thought, the few of them fell into his trap at the same time. The inner demon's eyes shone. Taking advantage of the moment when the other party was distracted, he had already arrived in front of Qi Yu. Whoosh! A light palm strike came out, but in fact, the air in the palm was completely compressed. It was compressed to a critical point, and the air produced a thunder-like sound. Bang! Without any fancy moves, his palm struck Qi Yu's chest. Qi Yu's chest immediately caved in. The scene in front of Qi Yu suddenly changed. He returned to the real world from the Battle of Zhuolu. When he saw his collapsed chest, he spat out a mouthful of blood. His scream was stuck in his throat, unable to come out. But his expression had already revealed many things. His eyes were wide open, as if his eyeballs were about to burst out of their sockets. He was like a kite with a broken string, flying far away. Hundred Faces Star Sovereign tried to take advantage of the situation to pursue, but things were not as easy as he imagined. The sword in Qi Yu's hand flashed as War Soul let out a high-pitched sword hum, like a phoenix stretching its neck to sing. Whoosh! The War Soul sword flew out and slashed towards the heart demon, as if it was splitting the heavens and splitting the earth. This power was too earth-shattering, to the point that the heart demon's back was drenched in cold sweat, and he hurriedly dodged to the side. However, this strike condensed all of Qi Yu's lifelong knowledge and cultivation. It was a life-saving strike, so there was no way to hide it. The might of this strike caused the world to change color. Although the black clouds in the sky were not struck by the strike, the sword beam's surging sword split the thick clouds into two, opening a huge gap. However, this was only the aftermath of the strike. Its true might was far greater than this. A sword beam flew past the inner demons at a speed visible to the naked eye. The inner demons were like a small boat on a turbulent sea that was struck by the waves. The clothes on the left side of his body cracked and turned to dust, revealing his skin. He was in a sorry state. He tumbled a few times before stabilizing his body. He did not have the time to check his injuries or tidy up his sorry state. His gaze quickly cast in the direction of the sword beam. Boom! Earth-shattering. This word seemed to be tailor-made for this scene. The heavens shook, the earth shook, and then, the earth cracked. As if it had suffered a great earthquake, with the courtyard house as the starting point, a crack appeared in the ground that ran through half of the capital. The capital was divided into two, with a natural chasm as the boundary. The buildings, roads, trees, everything in this chasm was cut in half. This was the true power of Qi Yu's strike. Moreover, it was a strike with all his strength when he was seriously injured and his life was in danger. This was a true expert. A strike to divide the capital. This sword strike would leave an indelible impression on the world, and it would be passed down for generations to come. It would become a popular topic of conversation after a meal. When the inner demon saw this scene, his expression changed and his cheeks burned with pain. Although he kept saying that he wanted to kill Qi Yu, this strike made him realize the gap between his fighting strength and Qi Yu's. He couldn't do that at all. Qi Yu's strike had also shaken the inner demon's mind. This was no less than a mental attack, so much so that the inner demons were completely petrified on the spot like puppets. The aftermath of this sword also pulled the others back to reality from the mental attack. Before they could calm down, they saw the scene in front of them. All of their expressions changed abruptly, and they were extremely shocked. Even Ji Wuxiang, who thought highly of himself, was no exception. He moved his lips, but in the end, he did not say a word. However, silence was better than words. Although he did not say a word, it was better than 1,000 words. The 100-change Star Lord thought himself infallible, but he was also shocked by this scene and finally realized how weak he was. That was because he was absolutely incapable of doing so. Although the Empyrean fairy was also shocked, she was more immersed in the sorrow of the illusion. This was because the little girl in the illusion was her, and the fairy-like woman was her mother. Her mother died because of her. She was still in the hospital and was on infusion every day. Today, I finally wrote a chapter. Please add my WeChat public account, Tang Xiao. I will update you on it every day. To read the latest novel, please visit the website. Chapter 1459. This sword strike had thoroughly intimidated most of the people. The restless powers in the capital all stopped in their tracks, their hearts filled with fear. Ji Wuxiang narrowed his eyes into slits, his gaze as sharp as a knife. He stared at the chasm below, his heart trembling. He thought to himself, Qiyu, I've really underestimated you. Qiyu looked at the might of his sword, which had split the capital, but he didn't show the slightest trace of arrogance. That was because his foundation had been shaken by the inner demon's attack. The inner demons had inherited Huang Xiang's battle prowess and had advanced by leaps and bounds. The power of a single strike had almost taken away half of Qiyu's old life. Qiyu seemed to have been immobilized. He was frozen in midair like a puppet, glaring at the inner demons with hatred. The inner demon finally came back to his senses. He looked at Qiyu with a solemn expression. When their eyes met, invisible sparks collided fiercely, making the air seem to boil. The inner demons spoke first, Qiyu, you're really bold. You wanted to kill me with your own hands. Don't you know that you won't be able to live if you kill me? This was the strength of the inner demons. It was easy to kill him, but he would immediately attach himself to the killer's body and control them. It was precisely this unique characteristic of the inner demons that caused many experts to be wary of taking action, including Qiyu and the Yellow Emperor. They only dared to imprison him and didn't dare to kill him. Just now, Qiyu had directly used his killing move in a moment of desperation. If the inner demons had been careless, they would have been killed. If that had happened, Qiyu's situation wouldn't have been any better. Qiyu was well aware of this, which was why he felt a wave of lingering fear. Qiyu stared at the inner demons unwillingly. If he could get rid of the inner demons, he wouldn't be so afraid of the inner demons like he was now. For example, although Tang Zhen was possessed by the inner demons, because he did not have any inner demons, he was not afraid of the control of the inner demons. Instead, he imprisoned the inner demons. He was extremely envious of this. Looking at the playful expression of the inner demons, Qiyu said fiercely, Inner demons, don't speak so soon. Times have changed, and things are different now. Do you really think that I haven't found a way to restrain you? The inner demons laughed hysterically. Ha ha ha, restrain me. All right, I'll wait and see. As he spoke, he simply crossed his arms and looked at Qiyu calmly. The provocation was self-evident. Qiyu was angry and resentful, but there was nothing he could do. At least, there was nothing he could do at the moment. His bold words just now were just a bluff. The inner demons had already been resurrected. If he really wanted to kill him, it was easier said than done. Seeing the inner demons directly ask Qiyu until he was speechless, the others were shocked. That was Qiyu, and he was actually stumped like this. Especially the various forces below, they were completely subdued by the imposing manner of the inner demons. They were deeply shocked. The inner demons was not a demon. Instead, he was like a god, high and mighty, as if he was in an invincible position. Ji Wuxiang's sharp eyes stared at the inner demons. He was carefully examining him, trying to see through him. Especially after hearing the conversation between the two, he understood that there was a secret behind it that no one knew. Although he was the High Lord of the Azure Dragon Hall and was well informed, he did not know most of the secrets from tens of thousands of years ago. Ji Wuxiang asked in a low voice, "What does he mean? Why don't you dare to kill him?" Qi Yu's face was pale. He said somewhat weakly, "You'll know if you try." Ji Wuxiang's pupils shrank. His gaze was like a torch, like a steel knife, as if he wanted to pierce through Qi Yu. Qi Yu was not moved by his imposing manner at all. Seeing this, the Empyrean fairy immediately said, "The inner demons are easy to kill, but his soul is not destroyed. Moreover, he will possess the murderer's body, thus taking over the magpie's nest and resurrecting again." What, there's actually such an unimaginable thing in the world? Ji Wuxiang's eyelids twitched as he cried out in surprise. Even with his wisdom and knowledge, it was difficult for him to remain calm when he heard such an unheard thing. Because, he knew very well what this meant. This meant that the inner demons were in a state of immortality. As long as a person did not die, no matter what kind of attack or inhumane torture he received, he would have a chance to turn the tables. This was the truth that countless people had practiced. Nothing in the world was different from this. The Empyrean fairy smiled mysteriously and egged him on, "If you don't believe me, you can give it a try. In any case, his actual combat ability is definitely not your match." Ji Wuxiang really wanted to give it a try, but seeing Qi Yu's embarrassed state, he resolutely decided to give up on this idea. The Empyrean fairy looked at Ji Wuxiang meaningfully. She knew that her words of provocation had no effect at all. After all, the other party was Ji Wuxiang, not a brat who could be swayed by words. The inner demons did not pay attention to the two's conversation. He only had eyes for Qi Yu. Now that Qi Yu was obviously an arrow at the end of its flight, all the more reason to take advantage of this opportunity to truly kill Qi Yu. Killing Qi Yu would not have any other side effects. On the contrary, it would dissolve the anger that had accumulated in his heart for tens of thousands of years. "Qi Yu, if you don't dare to kill me, then I'll kill you right now." The inner demons roared and launched another attack. Qi Yu hurriedly retreated. His footsteps were slightly staggered, and he was in a rather sorry state. The great Qi Yu was actually scared off by the inner demons. If word of this got out, wouldn't it make people laugh their heads off? However, Qi Yu knew that survival was the most important thing. He did not dare to be careless. Seeing that the inner demons were getting closer and closer, he directly pressed down on the cloud and landed on the ground. Qi Yu tried to blend into the crowd and use various geographical advantages to escape the inner demon's pursuit. Just a moment ago, he was still high and mighty. At this moment, he was completely reduced to a prisoner. Things took a sudden turn for the worse, and this feeling was not pleasant at all. Qi Yu could only grit his teeth and swallow it. "Inner demons, don't go too far." Qi Yu waved the war spirit sword. The sword light had obviously weakened by too much. The sword attack just now could be considered as overdraft. The power of the sword light was greatly reduced. It slashed towards the inner demons, but the inner demons easily dodged it. The inner demons had just been affected by the sword light, but they did not suffer much damage. So at this moment, they had the upper hand. Qi Yu secretly glanced at Ji Wuxiang. Ji Wuxiang's gaze was like water. It was very deep, and he had no intention of helping at all. Ji Wuxiang and Qi Yu had a fragile alliance. In the face of disaster, Ji Wuxiang would not be willing to take the risk to help Qi Yu. If he was not careful and accidentally killed the inner demons, then the gains would not make up for the losses. It would benefit Qi Yu for nothing. If Qi Yu died at the hands of the inner demons, then Ji Wuxiang would benefit instead. Comparing the two, it was easy to see who was better and who was worse. He naturally made a decision. Qi Yu glared at Ji Wuxiang hatefully. He did not count on him. Suddenly, a figure flashed in front of him. There was another person, 100 Transformations Star Lord. 100 Transformations Star Lord had already returned to his original appearance. When he was attacked by the inner demons, his mind was distracted. After experiencing the most primitive fear, all of his disguises were naturally removed. 100 Transformation Star-Lord's eyes flickered. With a wave of his hand, a water dragon flew up from the sky and roared as it charged towards Chi-Yu. Chi-Yu was caught off guard and was hit in the chest by the water dragon. Blood splattered all over the potholes on the ground. To read the latest novel, please visit Chapter 1460. Chi-Yu had never thought that there would be a day when he would receive such a fierce attack from the 100 Transformation Star-Lord, almost taking half of his life. The 100 Transformation Star-Lord's cheeks revealed a strange expression as he stared straight at Chi-Yu. Seeing the water dragon dissipate, he grabbed with both hands, and the rain pillar in the sky condensed once again, whistling as it rushed towards Chi-Yu. Obviously, the 100 Transformation Star-Lord wanted to take the opportunity to add another blade and completely kill Chi-Yu. Chi-Yu was enraged. The 100 Transformation Star-Lord was extremely daring, he actually wanted to kill him. Puff! A mouthful of blood spurted out from his mouth, completely spilling onto the war spirit sword. The sword light shone brightly, mixed with the blood light, and soared into the sky. Immediately, the originally low aura of the war spirit sword soared. Its aura was like a rainbow, releasing a resounding sword cry, whistling as it arrived in front of the 100 Transformation Star-Lord. The water dragon immediately protected its master, and with a loud bang, water splashed in all directions. The water dragon shattered into pieces, turning into a mist of water. However, this sword was too powerful, and the water dragon did not completely cancel out its power. After it dissipated, the bright red sword light still struck the 100 Transformation Star-Lord. Puff! A wound was drawn from the 100 Transformation Star-Lord's chest to his neck, dripping with blood. The 100 Transformation Star-Lord's pale face was like a dead man's as he fell into a pool of blood, finding it difficult to breathe. Although the 100 Transformation Star-Lord knew that his strength was astonishing, he was still not a match for Chi-Yu. The two of them were not opponents of the same order of magnitude. 100 Transformation Star-Lord, when did you become so bold? Chi-Yu could not hide his anger as he stared straight at the 100 Transformation Star-Lord and roared. Chi-Yu was not completely ignorant of the 100 Transformation Star-Lord, and was rather familiar with her personality, but what she had done just now had greatly exceeded his expectations. With Chi-Yu's understanding of him, he should have taken the opportunity to escape, and not counterattack. This was too out of character for him. Suddenly, Chi-Yu stared at the 100 Change Star-Lord with a strange look in his eyes. He had noticed something strange about the 100 Change Star-Lord. The 100 Faces Star Sovereign suffered such a heavy blow, and his life was hanging by a thread. However, he did not show any signs of fear, nor did he have any thoughts of escaping. It was as if he wanted to rush up and fight with Yi Shiwen. Since when did the 100 Faces Star Sovereign become so unafraid of death? There's a problem. Chi-Yu immediately determined. 100 Changes Star Sovereign, what's wrong with you? The 100 Change Star Sovereign did not answer him. Instead, he struggled to stand up. However, after struggling for a long time, he fell to the ground again. 100 Change Star Sovereign's reaction had already explained everything. Chi-Yu had a flash of inspiration. He turned his head to look at the inner demons and exclaimed, "You're the one behind this. You're controlling 100 Faces Star-Lord." Chi-Yu understood the means of the inner demons, so he immediately saw through the means of the inner demons. The inner demons laughed maniacally and did not deny it. "Chi-Yu, you're finally not blind anymore." Chi-Yu snorted angrily. "I should have known long ago that your inner demons are the best at controlling others. You're just repeating the same old trick. I just didn't expect 100 Faces Star Sovereign to fall into your hands." The 100 Faces Star Sovereign naturally had inner demons, so he was easily controlled by the inner demons. Earlier, the inner demons' attack had affected Chi-Yu, Ji Wuxiang, 100 Faces Star Sovereign, and the Empyrean Fairy. However, Chi-Yu and Ji Wuxiang were more resolute, so the inner demons did not manage to control them. As for the Empyrean Fairy, the inner demons naturally wouldn't attack her because of her close relationship with Tang Zheng. Thus, the only one left was Hundred Faces Star Sovereign, who was weaker in cultivation and had no relationship with the inner demons. Moreover, Hundred Faces Star Sovereign's mind was shaken and unstable at that moment. It was the easiest moment for the inner demons to take advantage of. The others heard the conversation between the two and were shocked. They all looked at Hundred Faces Star Sovereign on the ground in unison. No one felt pity for him. The weak were prey to the strong. Hundred Faces Star Sovereign also understood this principle. He was inferior and had become the puppet of the inner demons. This was his fate. The inner demons glanced at Hundred Faces Star Sovereign indifferently and shook his head with a sigh. Unfortunately, he didn't manage to kill you. However, you've suffered such a heavy blow. Don't even think about escaping. The inner demons was full of confidence. His smile was like a sharp knife that ruthlessly stabbed into Chiyu's heart. Chiyu's eyes were filled with hatred. He suddenly turned to Ji Wuxiang and said, Ji Wuxiang, if you really stand by and do nothing, I'm afraid you'll be the next target after the inner demons eliminate me. You also heard his lofty words and lofty aspirations clearly. Chiyu wanted to pull Ji Wuxiang in. Now, only Ji Wuxiang's intervention would give him a chance of survival. Ji Wuxiang was expressionless and unmoved. He said indifferently, it's easier to deal with the inner demons than to deal with both of you. These words were incomparably cruel. Chiyu was horrified. He gnashed his teeth and said, Ji Wuxiang, you're ruthless. You'll regret it. The inner demons are far more powerful than you think. Ji Wuxiang still turned a deaf ear to him and remained indifferent. The inner demons couldn't help but look at Ji Wuxiang with astonishment. His pupils suddenly shrank as he came to a conclusion. This Ji Wuxiang was indeed not an ordinary person. No wonder he could reach this stage. This was definitely not a coincidence. From his words, he could tell that he was a ruthless character. He had to be careful. Chiyu, don't waste your energy. No one will help you. You've already walked into a dead end and won't be able to escape even if you have wings. The inner demons joked. Chiyu was unwilling. His gaze shifted and fell on the Empyrean Fairy. His heart moved as he said impatiently, Empyrean Fairy, I'll remove the seal on your body. Help me. The Empyrean Fairy shrugged and said, I'm not the inner demon's match. Chiyu snorted coldly and said, then if I die, you won't be able to live either. Apart from me, no one can remove the seal on your body. Chiyu's words weren't empty. The seal he had placed on the Empyrean Fairy was indeed extraordinary. It was a secret art of the Ninely tribe. Outsiders simply didn't know about it, let alone how to remove it. The Empyrean Fairy had heard Chiyu explain the mysteries within, so she knew that Chiyu wasn't bluffing. If Chiyu were to die, then she might really have to be buried with him. She didn't want to be buried with Chiyu. But if she were to die, then perhaps she would be able to see Tangjing again. Who knew what would happen after his death? The Empyrean Fairy didn't know that Tangjing wasn't dead yet. All the information she had was from Chiyu. Seeing the Empyrean Fairy's fluctuating expression, Chiyu seemed to have grasped onto a life-saving straw and hurriedly said, this is a win-win situation. Although you're not the inner demon's match, you can definitely restrain him. After all, you're the Emperor of Heaven's daughter. The Empyrean Fairy glanced deeply at the inner demons. The inner demons smiled faintly and said, you can very well accept his offer and then try to see if you can save him from my hands. The Empyrean Fairy's survival instincts finally won over everything else. She said, Chiyu, if you remove my seal, then I can help you hold him back. But whether or not I can succeed is still unknown. But if I'm still alive after today, then I'll definitely seek you out for revenge. Chiyu was radiant with joy after hearing this. He didn't care about revenge at all. Everything else wasn't a problem as long as he could survive the current crisis. Seal, release. Chiyu made a prompt decision. The sword radiance in his hand flew up and landed on the Empyrean Fairy's body with a swoosh. Bang! A muffled sound rang out as if some invisible shackles had been removed. The Empyrean fairy was radiant with joy. Even her hair floated up as if she had come back to life. To read the latest novel, please visit the website. Chapter 1461. The Empyrean fairy's long hair danced in the wind as she stood in midair, staring straight at the inner demons. The inner demons frowned at her. Do you really want to help Chi-Yu and go against me? The Empyrean fairy said indifferently, since I've already promised Chi-Yu, I'll naturally lend him a hand. The inner demons shook his head. Actually, for some reason, I don't want to fight you. But if you insist, then don't blame me for being merciless. The inner demons were indeed merciless. This was a fight between experts. It was either you die or I die. A moment of carelessness would lead to eternal damnation. Seeing this, Chi-Yu laughed wildly, thinking that the heavens hadn't forsaken him yet. With the Empyrean fairy keeping the inner demons in check, he could escape with his life. Seeing the inner demons attacking the Empyrean fairy, Chi-Yu acted according to the situation. He turned around and retreated a great distance in the blink of an eye. The Empyrean fairy knew full well how powerful the inner demons were. She paid 120% of her attention. Her slender white hand pointed into the air, and a ray of light appeared. The stately painting. The stately painting hovered above the inner demon's head. The inner demons looked up and clicked his tongue. Extraordinary indeed. It's just that your inner demons haven't been eliminated yet. This little trick won't be able to shake your foundation. The inner demon's eyes emitted a radiant light that pierced straight into one's heart. The Empyrean fairy was startled. The stately painting trembled violently, as if the attack would collapse at any moment. Boom! Her heartstrings trembled as the scene before her changed. She had returned to the previous illusion. That cruel scene played out before her eyes once more. Ice crystals burst out from her body and pierced her mother's body. Looking at her mother's despairing eyes, the Empyrean fairy seemed to have fallen into despair as well. Her mind was in turmoil, as if she would collapse at any moment. Once she did, the inner demons would have the opportunity to firmly control her. This was the power of the inner demons. That was how the 100-change Star Lord was killed by the heart demon. It seemed that the Empyrean fairy was about to follow an ever-changing Lord's footsteps. Chi-Yu turned his head and saw the Empyrean fairy's crisis. He didn't feel the slightest bit of guilt. On the contrary, he laughed because his scheme had succeeded. Empyrean fairy, you're still too inexperienced. You don't know the power of the inner demons. You actually dared to promise me to attack him. Now it's too late for regrets. Chi-Yu snorted. Ji Wuxiang saw Chi-Yu leaving and was hesitating whether he should make a move to stop him. After all, Chi-Yu was now an arrow at the end of its flight. He was completely confident that he could stop him. Before Ji Wuxiang could make up his mind, he saw a ray of light flying from the horizon and blocking Chi-Yu's path. Chi-Yu was caught off guard and reacted in a panic. He actually fell from the sky and landed on the ground in a sorry state. Chi-Yu was intercepted. Ji Wuxiang watched this scene with his mouth agape. He couldn't imagine who had the power to do all this. Although Chi-Yu was an arrow at the end of its flight, a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. An ordinary cultivator was far from having such power. Who was it? Ji Wuxiang's pupils shrank. He stared vigilantly into the distance. A group of 4 people arrived on clouds like immortals. This cloud. Ji Wuxiang immediately recognized this cloud. It was the somersault cloud. It was actually Tang Zheng's somersault cloud. His gaze subconsciously fell on the clouds. His heartstrings trembled violently. He subconsciously exclaimed, Tang Zheng. Wasn't he dead? Why was he standing in front of him alive? As soon as this question emerged from the bottom of his heart, the clever Ji Wuxiang immediately had an answer. It turned out that he had been deceived. Tang Zheng had faked his death. Ji Wuxiang really couldn't accept this cruel reality. He had believed that Tang Zheng was dead because Chi-Yu had made a solemn vow. Logically speaking, Tang Zheng shouldn't have been able to survive from Chi-Yu's hands. In addition, the reactions of the people around Tang Zheng didn't seem out of the ordinary. It was indeed how his death should have been. All of this dispelled Ji Wuxiang's original concerns and suspicions. Ji Wuxiang stared at Tang Zheng with a burning gaze. His expression was complicated. Never in his wildest dreams would he have thought that he would be deceived, and deceived for so long. Without a doubt, Tang Zheng's powerful return meant that he had made preparations to deal with everything. Otherwise, he wouldn't have appeared so openly. If that was the case, there would be no point in faking his death. Ji Wuxiang's exclamation had already attracted the attention of the others, especially Qi Yu, who had fallen to the ground. This name was like a bolt of lightning that struck him hard. He was almost charred on the outside and tender on the inside. With great difficulty, he stabilized his injuries and rose into the air. As expected, he saw Tang Zheng and the others. That pair of eyes and aura couldn't be faked. Qi Yu would never forget it for the rest of his life. Therefore, he was certain that this person was the real Tang Zheng at first glance. This was equivalent to a ruthless slap to Qi Yu's face. In the past, he had always vowed that Tang Zheng was dead, and that he had killed him. Now that Tang Zheng was standing in front of him, alive and well, this was the greatest insult to him. He didn't even need to look at the others' eyes to know their expressions and reactions. He stretched out his finger and pointed at Tang Zheng from afar. He took a deep breath and said with a trembling voice after a while, "How are you not dead?" Tang Zheng sneered and said, "Qi Yu, are you surprised?" "Yes, you wanted me to die, but the heavens have eyes and let me live. Didn't you erupt with pure yang energy? How did you survive?" Qi Yu had the 9 yang saint body, so he knew the serious consequences of erupting with pure yang energy. Tang Zheng glanced at Li Xiaotian beside him. If it wasn't for her sacrifice, he would have died a long time ago. Tang Zheng didn't explain much and said with a murderous look, "In short, I survived so that I can stand in front of you one day and take revenge for that day." Qi Yu's eyes flickered and said with disdain, "Revenge? You overestimate yourself. You think that you can take revenge on me just because you survived the pure yang energy? What a joke." Tang Zheng was unmoved and said indifferently, "Is that so? I see that you are already an arrow at the end of its flight. I don't know where your confidence comes from." At this moment, the battle between the inner demons and the Empyrean fairy had reached its climax and didn't stop because of the arrival of these people. This was because they couldn't stop at all. The arrow on the bow had to be released. The Empyrean fairy couldn't hold on any longer and was about to be controlled by the inner demons. The Emperor of Heaven's eyes immediately locked onto his daughter and his face became anxious. He didn't care about the grudges between Tang Zheng and Qi Yu as he roared, "Don't hurt my daughter." Whoosh! A ray of light shot out from the Emperor of Heaven's hand and went straight for the inner demon's vitals. The inner demon's heartstrings trembled as if he saw the gates of hell open in front of him. He knew that he was under the threat of death. Finally, he couldn't care less about the Empyrean fairy and made a prompt decision. He stopped attacking and his face turned pale. He raised his hands, and an illusory fist shadow crossed above his head, blocking the light that was shooting towards him. Boom! The inner demons flew backwards and the Empyrean fairy was finally able to catch her breath. She came back from the gates of hell. Chapter 1462. When the Empyrean fairy came back to her senses, the scene before her eyes changed greatly. The illusion disappeared, but she still couldn't hide the pain in her heart. "Daughter!" The celestial Dharch hugged her and yelled anxiously. The word, "daughter," made the Empyrean fairy tremble. She came back to her senses and stared blankly at the Emperor of Heaven who was right in front of her. "Father!" The Empyrean fairy cried out involuntarily. Although the Emperor of Heaven had Yan Qingyi's appearance, the Empyrean fairy knew that the Emperor of Heaven and Yan Qingyi shared the same body. Moreover, the expression between his eyebrows was the same as her father's, so she naturally recognized him. When the Emperor of Heaven heard her call, he was pleasantly surprised. He hugged her tightly in his arms and said excitedly, "Daughter, I finally see you again." After the hurried departure from the gate of heaven, this pair of father and daughter had never seen each other again. Naturally, they missed each other very much. Now that they finally saw each other again, one could imagine how the father and daughter felt. The Emperor of Heaven looked at his daughter's haggard appearance and clearly understood that she had just suffered a great deal of pain and torture. Immediately, his anger erupted like a volcano and rushed out from the depths of his heart with a bang. His eyes emitted a cold light as he stared straight at the inner demons and said, "Inner demons, you dare to hurt my daughter, I will let you die without a burial place." Although the Emperor of Heaven and the inner demons were not of the same generation, Tang Zheng had just introduced him to a few people in the distance, so he also recognized the inner demons. Of course, he also understood the power of the inner demons. But even so, he was still determined to kill the inner demons. The Empyrean fairy had just experienced the power of the inner demons. She quickly grabbed the Emperor of Heaven's hand and said, "Father, don't be impatient. If you kill the inner demons, they will take over your body." The Emperor of Heaven didn't care and said murderously, "Is that so? Then I will do as he wishes. This body already has 2 souls, so I don't mind adding 1 more. When the time comes, let's see who will have the upper hand." The Empyrean fairy was stunned for a moment, then immediately understood. Yes, this body already had 2 souls, the Emperor of Heaven and Yan Qingyi. Moreover, they weren't ordinary people. If there was 1 more inner demonses, it would be hard to imagine what kind of scene it would be. As for whether or not the demons would be able to take the dominant position. After all, even the Emperor of Heaven might not be able to completely gain the upper hand when facing Yan Qingyi's soul. The Emperor of Heaven naturally thought through all of this. As the saying goes, when there are many lice, there is no need to be afraid of the itch. He might as well just kill the inner demons first and relieve the anger in his heart. When the inner demons heard this, they were dumbfounded. They no longer had their previous arrogance and said bitterly, "You will harm yourself by doing this." The Emperor of Heaven didn't think much of it and laughed dryly, "Harm myself? Ha!" The Emperor of Heaven was actually very clear about his current predicament. If he wanted to completely take over this body, it would be almost impossible. Yan Qingyi's power was beyond his expectations. Since that was the case, it would be better to bring in a third party. Perhaps he would have a chance of success. This was the Emperor of Heaven's wishful thinking. Looking at the Emperor of Heaven's attitude, the inner demons immediately realized that things were not going well. His combat ability was not at its peak, and he had just gone through a series of battles. He had consumed a lot of energy and his combat ability was greatly reduced. He might not be a match for the Emperor of Heaven. After all, the Emperor of Heaven was the most powerful figure in ancient times. He was definitely a supreme expert. Tang Zheng also heard the conversation between the inner demons and the Emperor of Heaven, but he didn't express any opinion. His target was Qiyu. As for the agreement between him and the inner demons, that was between them. The conflict between the Emperor of Heaven and the inner demons was because of the Empyrean fairy. Tang Zheng couldn't influence the Emperor of Heaven's decision. Moreover, Tang Zheng knew how powerful the inner demons were, so he was quite wary of him. At that time, he had no choice but to let the inner demons be reborn. If there was a way to get rid of the inner demons, he would definitely support it with both hands. Qiyu was an arrow at the end of its flight, so he didn't have the heart to care about the inner demon's predicament. He was like a clay bodhisattva crossing the river. He couldn't even protect himself. Tang Zheng stood in the air and walked on air. He approached Qiyu step by step. Qiyu was as still as a pine tree. He didn't seem to be afraid of Tang Zheng. However, when Tang Zheng got closer and closer, Qiyu's expression finally became extremely unnatural. He subconsciously took a step back. It was precisely this step that exposed his weakness. He was already afraid in his heart. Tang Zheng saw this point, but his heart was as calm as water. Because this was what he expected. Even if Qiyu didn't retreat, it wouldn't hinder him in the slightest. Tang Zheng calmly raised his sword. Hidden profound sword. Wang. The sword hummed incessantly. The battle intent was high. Qiyu also raised his sword. War Soul Sword. The imprint of Tang Zheng on this sword had been completely erased. So even when facing the previous owner, the War Soul Sword still conveyed hostility. Qiyu's gaze was immediately attracted by the hidden profound sword. He was a person who knew swords. With a glance, he could tell that the hidden profound sword was not an ordinary sword. At that time, he racked his brains to seize the War Soul Sword. He thought that it would be difficult for Tang Zheng to find a satisfactory magic treasure. At least, it would be difficult for him to find a good sword. After all, it was hard to find a good sword in this world. Qiyu had a deep understanding of this. But at this moment, when he looked at the hidden profound sword, he understood how shallow and laughable his original thoughts were. Tang Zheng had already found a good sword. Moreover, this sword was definitely not inferior to the War Soul Sword. He couldn't help but feel jealous of Tang Zheng. They both had the 9-yang saint body, so why was Tang Zheng's luck so good? Qiyu unwillingly asked, "What sword is this? Where did you get it?" Tang Zheng put on a fake smile and coldly said, "Qiyu, you didn't think that when you took my War Soul Sword, I would still have a peerless divine sword. Let me tell you, this is the hidden profound sword. It was personally refined by me." "What, you personally refined it?" Qiyu cried out in surprise. He opened his eyes wide in disbelief. Compared to the name of the hidden profound sword, he cared more about the fact that Tang Zheng refined a peerless divine sword. How could you refine such a powerful divine sword? Moreover, it's a saint weapon. Qiyu asked, still in a state of shock. Tang Zheng jokingly asked, "Why is it impossible? The truth is right in front of your eyes. Do you still want to deceive yourself and choose not to believe it?" Qiyu clenched his teeth and did not answer this question. But he looked at the hidden profound sword with a complicated expression. He had been poor all his life. Although his cultivation base was high and his battle strength was outstanding, he did not have any profound skill in refining, let alone refining a saint artifact. But Tang Zheng had done it. They were both celestials with the 9-yang saint body, but Qiyu was completely inferior. For an expert, this was tantamount to a huge blow. Seeing Qiyu's reaction, Tang Zheng could already guess what he was thinking. He did not plan on continuing to beat around the bush. Raising the hidden profound sword, a ray of light exploded from the tip of the sword. It was like an incomparably resplendent sun. "Qiyu, today we will decide who is stronger. Let's see if the War Soul Sword you stole is stronger or if my hidden profound sword is stronger." Tang Zheng loudly roared and took the initiative to attack. Immediately, a sharp sword chi covered the sky, engulfing the entire sky. The black clouds in the sky were completely shattered by this sword chi. The wind stopped and the rain stopped. To read a novel without mistakes, please visit Chapter 1463. The world had changed. Originally, the black clouds were about to destroy the city. At this moment, the clouds dispersed and the rain stopped. Sunlight shone down from the 9 heavens, illuminating this part of the sky. The sunlight shone on the hidden sword of Xianzong. The sword light and the sunlight reflected each other. It was exceptionally bright and eye-catching. Qiyu narrowed his eyes slightly. He thought that he had a good understanding of Tang Zheng, but when he saw Tang Zheng's exquisite sword technique and its power, his heart trembled violently. He suddenly realized that his understanding of Tang Zheng had lagged behind too much. Tang Zheng was no longer who he used to be. He had already undergone astonishing changes. Qiyu stared at the mysterious concealed sword, only to see the light on the mysterious concealed sword becoming more and more intense, like 10,000 rays of light. Obviously, this was a new sword move that Qiyu had never seen Tang Zheng use before. Indeed, Tang Zheng had never used this move before. This was the Taiji Yin-Yang swordsmanship that he had comprehended after his cultivation improved. Qiyu had many moves in the Taiji 2 form sword art. Every move and style had different changes and power. Qiyu had only seen the previous sword moves, so naturally, he didn't know the subsequent changes. The sword light was like a sun blooming on the tip of the sword. It turned into countless sword lights, blotting out the sky and covering the earth, shooting towards Qiyu alone. Qiyu's eyes were completely occupied by the sword light. He didn't have time to think as he thrust his sword forward. Who? Streaks of sharp sword lights also shot out from the tip of the sword, turning into one circle after another, majestically meeting the 10,000 streaks of sword lights. Most of the other people's attention was completely attracted by this scene. This earth-shattering battle was not inferior to Qiyu's shocking sword strike just now. Almost everyone in the huge capital saw a person standing proudly in the air like a god. He raised the divine sword in his hand, and a new sun seemed to appear in the sky. Then, the sword light fell from the sky, as if it was a punishment from the heavens. The punishment from the heavens fell and attacked the other person. They held their breaths. They didn't know if this sword strike could successfully defeat that person. After all, he had just divided the capital with a single sword strike. Its power was exceptionally terrifying. This scene was more spectacular and intense than any movie or novel. It made one's blood boil and almost stop breathing. The 10,000 rays of sword light finally struck the circles. Kacha! The circle at the front was shattered. Like the first domino falling, the rest of the circles shattered one after another, turning into streaks of energy that spread out in all directions. Qiyu's barrier collapsed. Countless sword lights struck his body. He was like a cannonball, smashing into the ground. Boom! With a loud bang, a cloud of dust soared into the sky. Qiyu's figure disappeared into the dust that filled the sky. The dust was like a sandstorm, quickly spreading in all directions. The ruined courtyard house was completely submerged by the sandstorm. No one could clearly see what was happening below the sandstorm. Tang Zheng was no exception. He was quite nervous. This attack was the most powerful attack he could muster. It could be called a killing move. However, whether it could kill Qiyu was still unknown. After all, without seeing Qiyu's corpse, it was impossible to say that he was dead. Qiyu was not an ordinary person. Tens of thousands of years ago, even the Yellow Emperor could not kill him. He wanted to rush into the dust and find out what was going on. However, his gaze was immediately attracted by the other side. The Sky Emperor and the Heart Demon were already engaged in a fierce battle, exchanging blows back and forth. It was abnormally intense. The battle had entered a white-hot stage. At the critical moment when victory was decided, Tang Zheng's eyes widened. The inner demons were no match for the Emperor of Heaven. The inner demons were indeed good at spiritual attacks. However, their actual combat strength was not ideal. Even if they occupied Huang Xiang's body, their actual combat strength could not be compared to the Emperor of Heaven's. The inner demons had already launched a spiritual attack on the Emperor of Heaven. However, the Emperor of Heaven was already prepared and immediately pulled out of the illusion. This greatly exceeded the inner demon's expectations. However, he immediately understood the problem. After all, the inner demons had taken turns to fight and used spiritual attacks on several masters at the same time. The consumption of power was too great. Therefore, he was no match for the Emperor of Heaven and retreated step by step. The Emperor of Heaven became more and more courageous as he fought. The anger in his heart seemed to be about to burst out from the top of his head. He was so angry that he almost lost his daughter again. His daughter was his lifeblood. In the past, he had spent countless efforts to save her life. How could he allow anyone to hurt her again? The outcome of the battle had been decided. However, Tang Zheng's heart was in his mouth. If the inner demons were to die, then the Emperor of Heaven would not be able to stay out of it. The inner demon's soul would enter the Emperor of Heaven's body. Would the inner demons be able to gain the upper hand? The inner demons had been entrenched in Tang Zheng's body for so long. Tang Zheng knew very well how dangerous and troublesome it was to have another soul in the body. He did not want the Emperor of Heaven to follow in his footsteps. Just as he was about to open his mouth to stop them, a figure blocked his path and looked at him indifferently. The dark pupils seemed to see through him completely. Tang Zheng's eyes immediately narrowed into slits. He looked at the other party with vigilance and said, Ji Wuxiang, you want to fight with me? Ji Wuxiang's eyes flickered with sparks as he said in a deep voice, Tang Zheng, you faked your death to deceive everyone. You really put a lot of thought into this. A scholar who has been away for 3 days must be looked at with new eyes. This sentence is really correct. The difference between you and your past self is like heaven and earth. Moreover, you actually used a plan to sow discord and have your opponents kill each other. This is truly a clever move, a brilliant move. Ji Wuxiang put on a fake smile that made people's hair stand on end. Tang Zheng's heart moved. It seemed that his original plan had been seen through by Ji Wuxiang. Ji Wuxiang was a smart person. If he did not see through it at this time, then he would not be Ji Wuxiang. After being stunned for a while, Tang Zheng did not show too much surprise. Seeing that Tang Zheng did not say a word, Ji Wuxiang said aggressively, Tang Zheng, you killed so many people in my hands. Even Granny Li died at your hands. Do you think that we can still be reconciled? Reconcile? Ha! Tang Zheng gave 2 dry laughs. Ji Wuxiang, have you ever thought of reconciling with me? I'm afraid that from the moment we met, you never thought of reconciling with me, right? Ji Wuxiang's inner demons were seen through. He said in a non-committal manner, of course, killing you is the most effective method. Since that's the case, then are you looking for me to settle accounts now? Or rather, are you planning to stop me? Tang Zheng deliberately asked. Ji Wuxiang walked forward step by step. He could not help but say, you've always wanted to destroy my heavenly chess. Today, I'll let you broaden your horizons and see just how strong the heavenly chess is. After saying that, Ji Wuxiang paused for a moment. He then said to himself, you also understand the heavenly chess. You can give it a try. Let's see if you understand the heavenly chess better than I do. Ji Wuxiang was full of confidence. He thought that using the heavenly chess to deal with Tang Zheng was more than enough. To read the latest novel, please visit Chapter 1464. Ji Wuxiang made his move. He raised his hands in the air, and the sky above the 9 heavens changed. Ji Wuxiang was unscrupulous. He simply let go of his hands and feet and made a big fanfare. The celestial chess had a foundation in the capital. Although much of it was destroyed back then, the foundation was still there. Therefore, when Ji Wuxiang performed the celestial chess, everything flowed naturally and burst forth silently. As the celestial chess was perfected step by step, the sky changed. The sun seemed to be more dazzling, even a little dazzling. Many people subconsciously raised their heads and looked at the sky. Tang Zheng did not raise his head because he could sense the change in the power of the stars. Besides, he was the person who had the deepest understanding of the celestial chess other than Ji Wuxiang. He did not need to raise his head to know the change in the sky. Once the celestial chess was activated, the power of the stars above the 9 heavens would pour down overwhelmingly. Above the firmament, stars twinkled. Even in broad daylight, it was difficult to conceal the light of these stars. Now, it was precisely this scene. Everyone looked at the sky in shock. They widened their eyes, feeling incredulous. Billions of stars twinkled as if they were right above their heads. Even if ordinary people could not sense the power of the stars, they felt an invisible pressure pressing down on their hearts in an instant. All was quiet. For most people, it was their first time experiencing the power of the celestial chess. They were all shocked and their hearts trembled. Tang Zheng was not surprised. He gently raised the hidden Xuanzang sword and stroked it with his fingers. He said, Hidden Xuanzang sword, in this battle, we will work together and become one with the sword. Let Ji Wuxiang see if his self-righteous celestial chess is more powerful or if we are more powerful. In the celestial chess, nothing could escape Ji Wuxiang's eyes. Tang Zheng's mutterings naturally reached his ears. That confidence and calmness made Ji Wuxiang's heart skip a beat. Ji Wuxiang had already fought with Tang Zheng in Dianan. Although Tang Zheng was defeated in the end and left Maicheng, Ji Wuxiang was not happy at all. He did not feel relaxed at all. Because in that battle, in order to hide his identity, Tang Zheng was restrained and did not use his full strength. Naturally, his combat strength was greatly reduced. But even so, Ji Wuxiang did not stop Tang Zheng, which showed how amazing Tang Zheng's cultivation was. Moreover, he had just witnessed how Tang Zheng dealt with Qi Yu's sword, which had left a deep impression on him. The light of the hidden mystic sword was not as dazzling as before, but it was precisely this silence that gave people a sense of suppression. It seemed like the hidden mystic sword was preparing for some kind of big move. Not only was the hidden mystic sword brewing, but so was Tang Zheng. He was quietly sensing the vast and mighty power of the stars descending from the sky. The celestial chess had already been activated, and under the effect of the power of the stars, it was repairing the previous defects. As long as the foundation was still there, the celestial chess could be repaired step by step under the influence of Ji Wuxiang. In the end, when the celestial chess was perfected, its explosive power would be even more astonishing. Tang Zheng's eyes gradually brightened, and the hidden mystic sword began to tremble more and more violently. Wang, wang. Finally, the hidden mystic sword's high-pitched sword hums continuously, and then, a vast amount of power of the stars descended from the sky, completely landing on the hidden mystic sword. Tang Zheng actually took the opportunity to activate the power of the stars. After the celestial chess was activated, there was already a vast amount of power of the stars descending from the sky. At the scene, Ji Wuxiang was not the only one who could use the power of the stars, Tang Zheng could too. Therefore, Tang Zheng activated the power of the stars for his own use, completely condensing it on the hidden mystic sword. Immediately, the power condensed on the hidden mystic sword was extremely terrifying, far surpassing the power condensed by Tang Zheng's own power from the previous sword. Ji Wuxiang saw through the trick, and his eyes were firmly attracted to the hidden mystic sword. He was shocked, and angry, and said to himself, Tang Zheng, you actually took advantage of the celestial chess and used the power of the stars to deal with me. He was the one who created the celestial chess, but in the end, it was used by someone to deal with him. This was a huge irony. But he had no way to stop all of this, he had no way to stop the celestial chess, because he had to rely on the celestial chess to deal with Tang Zheng. Therefore, he could only watch as Tang Zheng used the power of the stars to deal with him. He gnashed his teeth in hatred, but there was nothing he could do. He could only put away his thoughts and focus on dealing with Tang Zheng. Swoosh! The power of the stars finished condensing on the hidden mystic sword, and it shot up into the sky. Although it was only a simple and slightly thin sword light, and was not as dazzling as the previous sword light, in the eyes of those with discerning eyes, they immediately saw through the clues. The power of this sword was completely superior to the previous one. Ji Wuxiang's pupils shrank into slits, and he muttered a chant, which was the chant to activate the celestial chess's greatest power. The wind and clouds changed, and heaven and earth changed. At this moment, in the eyes of many, there was an illusion that this world was no longer the world they were familiar with, but had become a strange world. Boom! The invisible power intertwined. There was no dazzling light, but they intertwined to form an ocean. The waves surged and slapped the shore, fiercely slapping toward the sword light. The sword light stopped. It was like a small boat, rushing into the vast ocean. If it could not split the ocean in half, it would be drowned by the ocean and disappear completely. Tang Zheng's heart was in his mouth, and he held his breath. Without a doubt, this battle was the most powerful and most dangerous battle in history, completely surpassing all the battles of life and death he had experienced before. The mighty power of the stars was slapping at the sword light, and the invisible power stirred the airflow, making the airflow in the sky very chaotic. The two sides were in a deadlock, and the others were also affected. The battle between the Emperor of Heaven and the inner demons had reached its climax. Seeing this scene from afar, both of them were deeply shocked. Although the Emperor of Heaven was temporarily at peace with Tang Zheng, in fact, he did not think highly of Tang Zheng. After all, when they first met in the Divine Gate, he did not take Tang Zheng seriously. The inner demons knew more about Tang Zheng, but he was also shocked by this scene. This was completely the style of a determined master, and was not inferior to him in the slightest. He suddenly realized that his dream might not come true. It was precisely this moment of distraction that the Emperor of Heaven immediately took advantage of. He stepped forward, and the light in his hand shot out. Puff! The light hit the inner demon's heart. The heart subconsciously lowered its head and looked at its chest, which had completely bloomed into a mass of dark red. The vitality in his eyes gradually dissipated. He weakly raised his head, and the corner of his mouth revealed a trace of a sinister smile. He said intermittently, "You, really killed me, ha, ha." The laughter was very sinister, and it complemented his expression, but it suddenly stopped. The inner demons was not afraid of death, because he was originally an immortal soul. The Empyrean fairy saw this scene and was frightened. She subconsciously exclaimed, "Father." The Emperor of Heaven looked at the inner demons slowly losing their vitality, and was fully prepared. Suddenly, his heart palpitated, as if a force had forcefully rushed into his body. He immediately had a bad premonition. "Ha, Emperor of Heaven, I told you, if you kill me, I will take over your body." Suddenly, the inner demon's voice sounded in the Emperor of Heaven's mind. To read the latest novel, please visit Chapter 1465. When the Emperor of Heaven heard the voice in his mind, his face slightly changed, but he didn't lose his composure. After all, this was what he had expected. Although it really happened and made his heart tremble, he quickly calmed down. He silently checked the condition of his body and found that there was no sign of him losing control. Inner demons, so what if you have taken over my body? This is equivalent to digging your own grave and adding a cage for yourself. It will be difficult for you to go anywhere else. The Emperor of Heaven coldly replied. The inner demons laughed wildly. Emperor of Heaven, you are underestimating me too much. The inner demons, have been running rampant for so many years. If it was really so easy to imprison me, would I still be alive today? The Emperor of Heaven's heartstrings slightly moved. Indeed, if the inner demons were really so easy to imprison, then Qiyu wouldn't be so afraid of them. As if to confirm the inner demon's words, the Emperor of Heaven suddenly had a subtle feeling. A mysterious power spread from his brain in all directions, along his meridians, to his limbs and bones. The Emperor of Heaven hurriedly asked, "What are you doing?" "Of course I am taking over this body. I am completely becoming the owner of this body," the inner demons proudly said without any scruples. Originally, he also wanted to take over Tang Zheng's body. Unfortunately, Tang Zheng still had Qiyu's heart in his body. He also had Qiyu's soul. Moreover, he was also a Skywalker. His body was special, so the inner demons didn't succeed. Yan Qingyi's body wasn't that special, so the inner demons were fearless and full of confidence. Taking over someone's body was very easy for the inner demons. Moreover, this was one of his best skills. Who knew how many people had been taken over by him? This was one of the most important methods that he had passed down. It was one of the biggest things that he relied on in his life. Therefore, he had absolute confidence in this aspect. Once the possession was activated, it was as easy as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. It spread rapidly, attacking cities and seizing control of this body. Emperor of Heaven immediately sensed that something was wrong. His left arm was no longer under his control. This feeling was too terrifying. No matter who it was, they would not be able to remain calm. Inner demons, you want to seize my body? Stop dreaming. The Emperor of Heaven roared and immediately activated his power. After all, the Emperor of Heaven was not immortal. Thousands of years ago, he was known as the Emperor of Heaven. He was the most powerful expert in the world, and his divine abilities were unimaginable to ordinary people. Moreover, he had comprehended the heavenly Tao. This was his trump card. Operation of the heavenly Tao, expel the inner demons. A mysterious power burst forth from his body. This power did not seem to be overbearing. It was like flowing water, a trickling stream that silently moistened everything. However, when this mysterious power flowed to his left arm, it actually broke through the defense of the inner demons. It seemed that he would be able to seize control of it by force. The inner demons exclaimed, "What kind of divine ability is this?" He immediately recalled the words that the Emperor of Heaven had just said. He accurately grasped the two key words, Heavenly Tao. How can this *T Heavenly Tao be so powerful? The inner demons roared. It was not that he had never heard of the Heavenly Tao. After all, he had once been in Tang Zheng's body. He was not unfamiliar with it. However, he was very confident in his own strength. He did not think that the so-called Heavenly Tao was that powerful. It was just a boast by ignorant people. However, after personally experiencing the power of the Heavenly Tao, he immediately could not remain calm. The Emperor of Heaven sneered, "Ignorant inner demons, there are many things that you do not know. The Heavenly Tao is not something that you can contend against." The inner demon's heartstrings trembled, but he was not really afraid. Instead, he said unconvinced, "I don't believe that I, the great inner demons, will be defeated by your *T Heavenly Tao." The inner demons immediately launched a counterattack. Immediately, the Heavenly Tao was unable to move an inch. The left arm fell into the control of the inner demons. Moreover, the inner demons had a tendency to drive straight in. The Emperor of Heaven's expression changed slightly. Even the Heavenly Tao could not resist the inner demons. How did he do it? The reason why the Emperor of Heaven was called the Emperor of Heaven was that he had comprehended the Heavenly Tao. This was his greatest achievement in life. The people of the world did not understand the Heavenly Tao very well. Only the Emperor of Heaven comprehended the Heavenly Tao and understood how profound and unfathomable the Heavenly Tao was. The brilliant Heavenly Tao was not something that could be completely comprehended by one's own strength. The Emperor of Heaven only knew a little about the Heavenly Tao and did not completely understand it. Completely comprehending it was his ultimate dream. However, the deeper the Emperor of Heaven's understanding of the Heavenly Tao, the more he felt that wanting to completely comprehend the Heavenly Tao was a fool's dream. It was simply unrealistic. It's not that the Heavenly Tao is not good, but that I have comprehended too little of the Heavenly Tao. That's why I am unable to suppress the inner demons. The Emperor of Heaven immediately understood. Immediately, he felt ashamed. If he was defeated by the inner demons and was successfully possessed, wouldn't the Heavenly Tao's name be tarnished? To the Emperor of Heaven, this was something that absolutely could not be tolerated. The inner demons were still continuously attacking the city. In this short period of time, the left half of the body had actually completely fallen into the hands of the inner demons. The inner demons and the Emperor of Heaven each occupied half of the body. It seemed that the Emperor of Heaven was powerless to reverse the situation. In fact, this was the problem of specialization. Possession was a spiritual attack. This was the supernatural power that the inner demons relied on to survive. However, the Emperor of Heaven was not good at this. He was better at fighting, and the supernatural powers that he usually cultivated were mostly these. Every inch had its strong points, and every inch had its weak points. If one's strong points were to attack the enemy's weak points, it would naturally be twice the result with half the effort. The Emperor of Heaven was at a disadvantage on this point. The Emperor of Heaven also understood this principle, so he was ashamed and angry. The Empyrean fairy saw her father's predicament. Ever since he killed the inner demons, the Emperor of Heaven seemed to have been cast on him. He was motionless and suspended in midair. However, his expression kept changing and he was in extreme pain. The Empyrean fairy saw this and became anxious. Father and daughter were connected by heart. She immediately sensed the danger that her father was facing. The inner demons are trying to possess him. She was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. However, this was not her field of expertise. There was no way she could help her father. Moreover, her father's strength was far superior to hers. If even he was in such a dangerous situation, there was nothing she could do to help. She subconsciously looked at Tang Zheng. She saw that the battle between Tang Zheng and Ji Wuxiang was also very intense. Life and death were on the line. However, only Tang Zheng could save her father now. Therefore, she hesitated for a moment and shouted, "Tang Zheng, the inner demons have entered my father's body. They want to possess him. Hurry up and save my father." Her voice was clear and loud, immediately attracting everyone's attention. Especially the word possess, which caught everyone's attention. Tang Zheng's face darkened. The thing he was most worried about had finally happened. He had experienced the strength of the inner demons. If Qiyu had not set up a cage in his body to imprison the inner demons, he might not have been able to imprison the inner demons. At this moment, the heart demon was trying to take over the heavenly emperor's body. Furthermore, he still had a powerful opponent like Ji Wuxiang eyeing him covetously. If he wanted to help the heavenly emperor, it would be harder than reaching the heavens. Even so, he could not turn a blind eye and watch him die. After all, he was the Emperor of Heaven and the Empyrean Fairy's father. To read the latest novel, please visit Chapter 1466. Ji Wuxiang also saw the danger that the Emperor of Heaven was facing. He originally didn't pay much attention to the inner demons, but after seeing the Emperor of Heaven's reaction, he instantly understood that he had underestimated the inner demons. After all, Ji Wuxiang had fought with the Emperor of Heaven before. He had suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of the Emperor of Heaven and almost couldn't recover from the setback. Of course, that was in the past. Now, he was facing the Emperor of Heaven without any fear. Ji Wuxiang heard the Empyrean Fairy's cry for help and immediately realized that the opportunity had come. As long as Tang Zheng was distracted to save her, he could deal a fatal blow to Tang Zheng. Ji Wuxiang had already realized that his greatest enemy was not the Emperor of Heaven, Qiyu, or the 100 Transformation Star-Lord, but Tang Zheng in front of him. This person's rocket-like cultivation speed gave him a deep sense of crisis. He had to take advantage of the fact that his wings were not fully grown to give him a fatal blow. Only then would he have a chance to carry out his grand plan. Ji Wuxiang slightly narrowed his eyes, and a light overflowed from his small eyes. He was like a wild wolf, eyeing Tang Zheng, this fierce tiger, like a tiger eyeing its prey. The hidden sword let out a resounding sword hum. Its light was restrained. It pierced through the vast sea of chess pieces and finally broke through a hole. It found a path and broke through the bindings of the vast sea. The sword light turned and flew together with Tang Zheng toward the Emperor of Heaven. The time has come, the heavens are helping me. Ji Wuxiang was satisfied in his heart. He opened his eyes completely and a terrifying light burst out, as bright as the stars. The chess pieces revolved and gathered all the power. Under the sky, the stars flickered. They were so bright that no one dared to look directly at them. Above the 9 heavens, all the astral powers gushed down, enveloping this part of the world. The air became abnormally viscous, as if this space had really turned into an ocean. Everyone was immersed in the ocean, and their movements became sluggish. These star powers were like tsunamis. They were like ferocious beasts from the prehistoric times. They opened their bloody mouths and extended their long fangs, trying to tear Tang Zheng apart. Tang Zheng turned his back to the beast and flew towards the Emperor of Heaven. Although the air had become very thick and slowed down people's movements, it still didn't have much of an effect on Tang Zheng. His movements were still as fast as the wind, and it seemed that he had no way to resist the ferocious beast behind him. Roar! A roar rang out, sounding like the roar of a ferocious beast. In fact, this was the sound produced by the formless astral energy. Suddenly, a sword light flashed. This sword light was not blinding. It was the light of the hidden Xian sword itself, but it was this gentle sword light that gave people a feeling of extreme sharpness. Tang Zheng disappeared. That's right, he disappeared into thin air. At this moment, the sword light rapidly expanded outward, forming a giant sword. Whiz! The War Soul sword flew out, slashing towards the monstrous wave, the ancient ferocious beast. Man and sword as one. Ji Wuxiang's pupils constricted as he cried out in alarm. Man and sword as one, this was the realm that many swordsmen dreamed of. Back then, Tang Zheng had seen the martial sect elder reach the realm of man and sword as one, but that was with his own life as the medium, burning his own life as the price. Furthermore, the power of this kind of man and sword as one was not very strong. This was because his cultivation was restricted. This was a method of killing the goose that laid the golden eggs. Naturally, the power was greatly reduced. Tang Zheng's man and sword as one was completely different. After experiencing the battle just now, his comprehension of the way of the sword had risen to another level. The Taiji Two Forms sword technique had also unlocked a new move. Suddenly, he had an epiphany. With a sudden inspiration, he instantly displayed the realm of man and sword as one. This move did not belong to the Taiji Two Forms sword technique, nor did it belong to the heaven-flying immortal sword technique. It was a new sword move that he had accidentally comprehended. He did not even have the time to think of a name for the new sword move. This move immediately came in handy. If a normal cultivator wanted to create a new move, it would not be difficult. However, most of the time, it would be some useless moves that were not very useful. Only those who could truly create very powerful moves, or even a set of systematic martial arts, would be considered a true grandmaster. Tang Zheng had never tried to create a simple move, because he did not like those useless moves. Furthermore, the sacred arts that he learned were all supreme sacred arts, and did not need to work hard to create new moves. But this intense battle had stimulated his inspiration, and the man and sword as one was like a stroke of genius. Therefore, he immediately decided to use it. He had absolute confidence in this sword move. Outsiders thought that Tang Zheng was defenseless and had no way to resist Ji Wuxiang's attack this time. In fact, Tang Zheng had been secretly accumulating power, ready to attack. He knew that as long as he turned around and helped the Emperor of Heaven, Ji Wuxiang would definitely not miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. At that time, if he was careless, he would lose his life on the spot. There was no other way. Tang Zheng naturally would not make such a stupid mistake. He might as well beat Ji Wuxiang at his own game, causing Ji Wuxiang to counterattack crazily. Tang Zheng seized this opportunity and used the sword move that he was most proud of to counterattack Ji Wuxiang. Tang Zheng entered a mysterious realm. His body seemed to have disappeared. The sword was him, and he was the sword. He had reached the realm of, you have me, I have you in me. Whoosh! The hidden mystic sword flew to the front of the monstrous waves. Pooh! Like breaking dry weeds and smashing rotten wood, a hole was torn open in the vast power of stars. The culprit was cut in half from the middle. The hidden mystic sword's attack did not slow down. It tore through layers of monstrous waves. Its momentum was vast and earth-shattering. Boom, boom, boom. Loud sounds rang out in the capital like thunder. The surface of the ground in many places suddenly cracked open, spreading in all directions like a spider web. Although Ji Wuxiang did not see all of this with his own eyes, he could clearly feel it. Because the capital was covered by the celestial chess, not a single change could escape his eyes. A look of horror immediately appeared in his eyes. Then, despair filled his eyes. Because, he knew what this meant. The places where the ground cracked open were the foundations of the celestial chess that he had meticulously set up a long time ago. Even after he left the capital, these foundations of the celestial chess were still there. That was why he could set up the celestial chess so quickly this time to make up for the flaws in the past. But now that these foundations were destroyed, the celestial chess was completely destroyed in the capital. If he wanted to set up the celestial chess again, it would not be done in a short time. My celestial chess! Ji Wuxiang let out a heart-wrenching cry of grief. A mouthful of blood spurted out from his mouth. The color of blood on his face weakened greatly. The rumbling sound weakened. Without the support of the celestial chess, the power of stars could not continue and lost its attacking power. The hidden mystic sword's power did not weaken at all. It tore through the sky like breaking dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. The sky seemed to have been split into two. The hidden mystic sword slashed viciously at Ji Wuxiang. To read the latest novel, please visit Chapter 1467. When Ji Wuxiang saw the hidden sword, the despair in his eyes intensified, but he did not give up. He gritted his teeth and flew to the ground, trying to get rid of the hidden sword. But the hidden sword was so powerful, how could it be so easy to get rid of it? Whoosh! The hidden sword quickly chased after him, and it was about to catch up with him. Ji Wuxiang rushed into a cloud of dust, which was exactly the same cloud of dust that was stirred up when Qiyu fell. Obviously, Ji Wuxiang was trying to use the thick cloud of dust to create an opportunity for himself to escape. The hidden sword also rushed in. Suddenly, a sharp sword aura was like a hairdryer, and in the blink of an eye, the cloud of dust was scattered and blown in all directions. The cloud of dust did not give Ji Wuxiang a chance to escape. On the contrary, he was completely exposed to the hidden sword. A huge pit appeared in front of him. The road ahead was blocked, and he had no way to escape. He led himself into a dead end, which was digging his own grave. The despair in Ji Wuxiang's heart intensified. Did God really want me, Ji Wuxiang, to die here? He was not willing. Suddenly, his pupils shrank, and he saw a black dot at the bottom of the pit. It was a person. Qiyu. He immediately recognized it. It was Qiyu, who was knocked down here by Tang Zheng. Tang Zheng did not have time to pursue the victory. Qiyu was unconscious at the bottom of the pit. At this moment, he finally woke up in a daze. Qiyu's mouth was stained with blood. He was already an arrow at the end of its flight, and after the battle with Tang Zheng, he was seriously injured. Otherwise, with his cultivation, how could he be unconscious for so long? When he woke up, he immediately made up his mind to escape from this place. He must not see Tang Zheng in a short time, or his life would be in danger. After all, he did not have the means of the inner demons, and could rely on that method to survive. However, when he noticed the abnormality above his head, he immediately raised his head and saw a scene that almost made his soul leave his body. Ji Wuxiang flew towards him, and behind him was the hidden sword. Even a fool would know that this was a sign of danger. He wanted to run away, but he was so heavily injured that even flying was barely possible for him. Just as he staggered into the air, Ji Wuxiang flew above his head. When Ji Wuxiang saw Qiyu, it was as if he had seen his savior. A glimmer of hope appeared in his eyes. The turning point is here. Ji Wuxiang was secretly delighted. He stretched out his hand and grabbed Qiyu. If it was in the past, Qiyu would definitely have a way to dodge this attack. However, at this moment, the difference between him and Ji Wuxiang was like heaven and earth. There was no way for him to dodge. He felt his body tighten as he fell into Ji Wuxiang's hands. His eyes lit up as a sword light pierced towards him. He had no way of dodging and could only watch as the sword pierced his heart. Pooh! Blood spurted out from his chest. The life in Qiyu's eyes quickly dissipated. He opened his mouth and said weakly, "You. So ruthless." This was not directed at Tang Zheng, but at Ji Wuxiang. He and Ji Wuxiang came to the capital to find the 100 Faces Star Lord and kill him to relieve the hatred in his heart. It was a pity that before he could get rid of 100 Change Star Lord, he had become a sacrificial lamb and Ji Wuxiang's shield. Tang Zheng and the hidden sword became one. When the hidden sword pierced Qiyu's body, blood dyed the hidden sword red. He only felt his eyes turn red and he was separated from the hidden sword. This was not because of the blood, but because when he saw Qiyu being stabbed by the hidden sword, he was slightly distracted. He and Qiyu had known each other for a long time and he also had Qiyu's heart in his body. So the connection between the two of them was not just a little bit. Of course, he also knew that Qiyu had always wanted to take over his body. After all, he was a celestial and the 9-yang saint body was the most important thing to Qiyu. They were both celestials and Qiyu was such a powerful figure. Since ancient times, he had always been an undisputed expert. But now that Qiyu was about to die at his hands, although he had already made up his mind, when it really came to this point, his heart was still unable to calm down. It was precisely because of this momentary distraction that his one with the sword realm was affected. He was separated from the hidden sword and appeared in the air. Looking on as the hidden sword pierced Chiyu's body, all sorts of feelings welled up in his heart. His eyes constantly fluctuated. When he heard Chiyu say, "You're so ruthless," he subconsciously thought he was talking about himself. He retorted, "You've always been scheming to kill me. How am I ruthless?" "It's him." Chiyu corrected him with difficulty. Tang Zheng suddenly realized that Chiyu was talking about Ji Wuxiang. His gaze turned to look at Ji Wuxiang. "Oh, where did he go?" Tang Zheng was startled. He actually didn't see Ji Wuxiang. He had actually used Chiyu as a shield to block the hidden sword's attack. Then, he took advantage of Tang Zheng's absent-mindedness to escape. Ji Wuxiang was someone like him. His ability to act according to circumstances was already ingrained in his bones. Furthermore, he was a peak expert. In a life-and-death situation, he could not afford to be distracted in the slightest. Moreover, he was good at scheming. He had calculated that by using Chiyu as a shield, he would definitely be able to make Tang Zheng lose his focus. No matter who it was, killing a strong expert like Chiyu would cause their mind to fluctuate violently. As a fellow expert, Ji Wuxiang could empathize with him. Therefore, he had calculated this point from Tang Zheng and fled. In the huge black hole, there was only Tang Zheng and a dying Chiyu. Tang Zheng knew that there was no point in pursuing. Ji Wuxiang would definitely use all his strength to escape. The people on the ground might not be able to stop him. He decided not to give chase. He looked at the dying Chiyu. Chiyu knew that his life was coming to an end. He looked weakly at Tang Zheng. His eyes seemed somewhat desolate. He said intermittently, "I never thought that I would die in your hands." Yes, Chiyu had never thought of this even in his dreams. On the trip to Heavenly Mountain, he thought that he had already killed Tang Zheng. However, in the end, Tang Zheng had secretly made a move and actually survived. A person he did not put in his eyes from the beginning had finally grown up and killed him. This could not be said to be a huge irony. Tang Zheng knew what Chiyu was thinking. All his hatred disappeared the moment this thing pierced his heart. He said calmly, "Chiyu, when you killed me, you caused my pure yang energy to erupt. If it wasn't for Li Shaotian risking his life to save me, I would have died long ago. Therefore, when I kill you, you can only bear with it. So that's how it is. You survived like this." Chiyu suddenly understood. Ever since he saw that Tang Zheng was still alive, he could not figure out how Tang Zheng had survived. At this moment, the answer was finally revealed. But Chiyu changed the topic. His face suddenly turned red, as though he had regained his vitality. Even his speech became much smoother. It was like the final radiance of the setting sun. "Do you think that after dodging it once, you can still dodge it next time? 20 years old will be your greatest hurdle. When that time comes, you will have a taste of the true taste of the eruption of pure yang energy." Ha ha ha. Suddenly, the laughter came to an abrupt end. Chiyu's head tilted, completely devoid of life. An ambitious and ruthless person who had escaped the Battle of Zhuolu tens of thousands of years ago had now died under Tang Zheng's mysterious hidden sword. Chapter 1468. Chiyu's final laughter was still echoing in Tang Zheng's ears. He frowned and stared at Chiyu, who had widened his eyes but was not breathing at all. His heart was in turmoil. 8 Delta 1 Chinese Literature Network. Chiyu's last words gave him an ominous premonition. He knew very well that when he turned 20, it would be the critical moment for his pure yang energy to explode. At that time, he thought that he should have the experience and preparation to deal with all this after experiencing the explosion of pure yang energy last time. However, Chiyu's meaning was obvious. When he turned 20, the consequences of the explosion of pure yang energy would be more serious than he imagined. As for how serious it would be, he could not imagine it. He took a deep breath and secretly comforted himself, "I'll deal with whatever comes my way." I'll definitely have a way to get through this crisis. That's not right. I'll be 20 next year, but my exact birthday is definitely not my current birthday. That's because my current birthday is the day Grandpa picked me up. My actual birthday is before that. Tang Zheng felt a chill run down his spine. He had almost overlooked such a serious problem. His current birthday was on the 5th of April, so his actual birthday would be before that. It was almost the end of the year, which meant that in a few months, it would be his 20th birthday. However, the key point was that he did not know the exact date. He had also forgotten to ask his biological parents. Furthermore, the two of them had already left without saying goodbye and disappeared without a trace. He had no way of asking them. His expression gradually turned serious. With such a serious hidden danger, if not for Qi Yu's last words reminding him, he would probably be helpless when the pure yang energy exploded. I must be careful in the next few months. He secretly warned himself to calm his fluctuating emotions. His gaze once again landed on Qi Yu. His fingers gently stroked Qi Yu's eyelids, causing him to close his eyes. Then, he soared into the air, leaving Qi Yu at the bottom of the pit. Whoosh! A sword beam shot out from his hand. Boom! The sword light hit the ground, and the dust from all directions flowed into the crater like a mudslide. In an instant, the crater was filled up, covering Qi Yu. Qi Yu, rest in peace here, Tang Zheng said calmly. Then, he turned his gaze and looked into the distance. The Emperor of Heaven also landed on the ground, his whole body trembling. The situation was not optimistic. The others did not notice the situation in the pit. Seeing him fly up and bury the pit with his sword, many people surrounded him. Li Xiaotian and Xiaobai worriedly asked him how he was doing. Tang Zheng shook his head and said, Qi Yu is dead, and Ji Wuxiang escaped. Xiaobai said regretfully, Master, it's all my fault. Just now, Ji Wuxiang escaped from the pit. I didn't catch him. Tang Zheng waved his hand and said, It's not your fault. I was too careless. A crafty rabbit has 3 burrows. Moreover, it's Ji Wuxiang. If you really want to kill him, it won't be that easy. He had interacted with Ji Wuxiang too many times. He deeply understood how cunning Ji Wuxiang was. If he really wanted to get rid of him, it would not be an easy matter. I'll go help the Emperor of Heaven. Tang Zheng was worried about the Emperor of Heaven's safety. He turned around and rushed towards the Emperor of Heaven. However, the Emperor of Heaven suddenly let out a sharp whistle, causing his heart to tremble. He subconsciously stopped in his tracks. For some reason, there seemed to be a change in the Emperor of Heaven's body. Especially that sharp whistle, it was not the Emperor of Heaven's voice at all. It was Yan Qingyi. Tang Zheng immediately realized that there was a subtle change in the situation. Yan Qingyi was heavily injured and her divine sense was suppressed. Therefore, the Emperor of Heaven was able to take the initiative. At this moment, the Emperor of Heaven was being pressured by the inner demons step by step. He had already lost the initiative and was in imminent danger. Yan Qingyi's divine sense had recovered. In fact, there were many reasons for this. The most important one was that the Emperor of Heaven had activated the heavenly Tao. This was equivalent to returning the favor to Yan Qingyi. The heavenly Tao had completely awakened her. When she woke up, there were 3 souls in this body. It was truly 3 souls in one body. The inner demons saw that victory was in sight. However, a mysterious divine sense appeared. Then, it attacked his territory with an unstoppable force. Immediately, he was like a defeated general. He was quickly defeated. He was actually forced into a desperate situation by this mysterious divine sense. What's going on? What kind of divine sense is this? The inner demons cried out. They were in a panic. Inner demons, you dare to break into my body. I'll make sure you don't return. Yan Qingyi's voice rang out. Yan Qingyi had recovered. Coupled with the return favor from the heavenly Tao, her strength had increased greatly. She was actually able to threaten the inner demons. This was something that no one had expected. The Emperor of Heaven was already at his wits' end. Suddenly seeing this turn of events, he was overjoyed. He said, "Inner demons, let's see how arrogant you are now." Just now, he was extremely sullen. He had almost died at the hands of the inner demons. However, he was also somewhat resentful. He had put in so much effort, but he still couldn't resist the inner demon's attack. However, Yan Qingyi had actually succeeded. This was equivalent to defeating him. A young junior had defeated him. This was not a small blow to him. Apart from the freak Tang Zheng, Yan Qingyi's freakishness was not the slightest bit inferior to Tang Zheng. The Emperor of Heaven was deeply hurt. "Humph, ignorant people. My inner demons is not something that you can contend against." The inner demon stabilized his mind and immediately counterattacked. Spiritual attacks were the attacks that he was most proficient in. Once he madly counterattacked, his attacks could be said to be fierce. He immediately showed signs of recovering his lost territory. In front of the heavenly Tao, this little trick is completely insignificant. It can't even withstand a single blow. Yan Qingyi said coldly. She was full of disdain. Heavenly Tao. The heart demon and the celestial emperor were shocked at the same time, stunned by these two words. The inner demons had just seen the Emperor of Heaven's heavenly Tao, but he had won. However, now this Yan Qingyi's heavenly Tao was clearly stronger than the Emperor of Heaven's. It was a huge threat to him. The shock in the Emperor of Heaven's heart could be imagined. He had comprehended the heavenly Tao for so many years. He thought that in this world, he was the one who understood the heavenly Tao the most. However, he suddenly realized that this was not the case. Yan Qingyi's comprehension of the heavenly Tao was far above his. How could he accept this reality? What kind of fortuitous encounter did she have in the gate of heaven? How could it cause such a drastic change in her life? Why is it that I have painstakingly comprehended the heavenly Tao for so many years, but I can't compare to her in such a short time? The Emperor of Heaven's heart was filled with sorrow. Yan Qingyi did not give the inner demons a chance. When she shouted the two words, "Heavenly Tao," she once again launched a fierce attack. The heavenly Tao fiercely suppressed the inner demons. After a while, the inner demons were forced into a corner. The initiative of this body fell into Yan Qingyi's hands. The inner demons retreated step by step. In the end, he had no choice but to retreat into the brain and prepare for the final counterattack. The brain was a person's central hub. Only by completely occupying the brain could one control the body. At the last moment, he could only give it his all. You think this will work?" However, Yan Qingyi saw through his intentions. The inner demons could not resist the heavenly Tao's brilliant heavenly might. The Emperor of Heaven personally felt the power of the heavenly Tao that Yan Qingyi had activated. It was indeed quite different from his own. To be precise, the heavenly Tao that he had activated was not as good as Yan Qingyi's heavenly Tao. However, the Emperor of Heaven was lucky enough to have a new understanding. After all, he had comprehended the heavenly Tao for so many years. A simple opportunity could allow him to have a new understanding of the heavenly Tao. Chapter 1469. The Emperor of Heaven had a new understanding of the heavenly Tao, and it was immediately reflected. His divine sense immediately became much stronger, and he took more initiative in his body. 81 Chinese network. The inner demons and Yan Qingyi were fighting endlessly, which gave the Emperor of Heaven an opportunity to take advantage of. The inner demons turned pale with fright and cried out, "Yan Qingyi, you and I will fight to the death, but you let others take advantage of you." Yan Qingyi was unmoved and replied, "This is my body. Other than me, no one else can even think of touching it." Obviously, she did not put the Emperor of Heaven in her eyes, although she had already seen that the Emperor of Heaven had a new understanding of the heavenly Tao. But she had really received the true inheritance of the heavenly Tao, and it could be said that she had comprehended the true meaning of the heavenly Tao. Naturally, she was not afraid of the Emperor of Heaven. She and the Emperor of Heaven could be considered to be of the same origin. If she wanted to deal with the Emperor of Heaven, it would be easier than dealing with the inner demons. After all, know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. She knew the Emperor of Heaven better. When the inner demons heard this, they really wanted to roll their eyes. They had deliberately schemed, but Yan Qingyi did not fall for it. The Emperor of Heaven was not in a hurry to attack. He had already experienced the power of Yan Qingyi, and he did not have many thoughts about this body. At this moment, when he saw Yan Qingyi's attitude, he immediately realized the seriousness of the situation. After Yan Qingyi woke up, her strength had probably increased greatly. It could be seen from the way she dealt with the inner demons. Yan Qingyi was so powerful. If he continued to stay in her body, it would be more difficult to escape in the future. He could not even rule out the possibility of being killed by Yan Qingyi. After thinking this through, the Emperor of Heaven immediately had a plan. The inner demons had restrained Yan Qingyi. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He had to take advantage of this opportunity to immediately get rid of Yan Qingyi's body and completely get rid of her restraints. For a powerhouse like the Emperor of Heaven, once he left Yan Qingyi's body, he had many ways to be reborn. At least, he could survive. The Emperor of Heaven was a decisive person. After thinking about the cause and effect, and the pros and cons, he immediately began to take action. In his brain, the inner demon had already retreated to this place. Facing Yan Qingyi's pressure, he had no ability to resist at all. He hid deeper and deeper in his brain. Yan Qingyi wasn't going to let him go so easily. Taking advantage of the situation, the heart demon situation was getting worse and worse. It was truly miserable. The time has come. When the Heavenly Emperor saw this, he immediately activated the Heavenly Tao. Using the new mysteries of the Heavenly Tao that he had just comprehended as a guide, he miraculously escaped from Yan Qingyi's body. This was the mystery of the Way of Heaven. Although he had only comprehended a part of it, it had played an unexpected role. In addition, Yan Qingyi and the Emperor of Heaven were of the same origin, so there was no strong rejection. That was why the Emperor of Heaven was able to leave his body so smoothly. When he left the sea of suffering, his soul immediately floated in the air. For the Emperor of Heaven, this was a very dangerous situation. If he stayed there for too long, his soul would be damaged. After all, this was the human world. The yang energy was too strong. Without the protection of a physical body, his soul floated alone outside. It was very dangerous. The Emperor of Heaven's soul has left his body. Li Shaotian was one step ahead of Tang Zheng and found the clue of the Emperor of Heaven. Immediately after, Tang Zheng also saw that the strand of soul had left his body, and was floating in the air while trembling. As for Li Shaotian seeing the clue faster than him, he was not surprised at all. After all, Li Shaotian was very different from ordinary people. She was a person who could freely walk between the ghost world and the human world. She had a natural sensitivity to souls. In this point, she was even more sensitive than Tang Zheng. When the Empyrean fairy heard Li Xiaotian's words, she quickly said, "Tang Zheng, quickly think of a way to save my father." She also knew the danger of the soul being exposed outside. "Why don't I try?" Li Xiaotian asked cautiously. Tang Zheng's eyes lit up. He nodded and said, "Okay, you can help him." At this juncture, without a suitable body, the Emperor of Heaven could not possess a body to return to life. The only way was to use a special magical power to protect his soul from the erosion of the yang energy. The Empyrean fairy was surprised when Li Xiaotian volunteered. She wanted Tang Zheng to help. After all, Tang Zheng's strength was well known. Li Xiaotian was too weak, so how could she have a good idea? The Empyrean fairy was not clear about Li Xiaotian's adventure in the ghost world, so she was worried. Tang Zheng saw the Empyrean fairy's worry and quickly cast a comforting look, saying, "Don't worry, she is more suitable in this aspect than I am." The Empyrean fairy was incredulous and looked at Li Xiaotian with suspicion. She did not know why Tang Zheng said that. This was a matter of life and death, so he could not be the slightest bit careless. The Empyrean fairy understood Tang Zheng and knew that he was not a person who fooled around. He must have his reasons. She bit her lips and nodded resentfully. Li Xiaotian did not hesitate at all. He immediately cast a spell and chanted. This was a magical power that he learned from Dizang of Goguryeo. It was extensive and profound. A gust of yin energy was produced out of thin air. It was easy to imagine how difficult it was to produce this kind of yin energy in the human world where yang energy was at its peak. However, Li Xiaotian succeeded in just a few moves. Tang Zheng's eyes lit up. This move was too beautiful. He was ashamed of his inferiority. If he wanted to guide the yin energy, he could only use the ghost world token to open the door between the two worlds and guide the yin energy into the human world. Li Xiaotian did not need to go through so much trouble. Her physique had become very special. There was both yang energy and yin energy in her body. Therefore, when she cast the spell, a gust of yin energy easily appeared and shrouded the soul of the Emperor of Heaven. The Emperor of Heaven originally felt very tormented, as if he was being roasted by fire. This feeling was self-evident. He was thinking of a way when he suddenly felt a chill all over his body. The feeling of being roasted by fire disappeared and was replaced by a feeling like a spring breeze, comfortable to the depths of his soul. He stared at Li Xiaotian in surprise, thinking, how did she do all this? Li Xiaotian did not finish casting the spell. She was chanting something again. Tang Zheng could tell that it was the Ksitagarbha Sutra. Dizang of Goguryeo also taught Li Xiaotian the Ksitagarbha Sutra. It was just that her understanding of the Ksitagarbha Sutra was not as good as Tang Zheng's. Although she did not have a lotus flower in her mouth, she could blurt out Sanskrit. However, when he heard these scriptures, the Emperor of Heaven felt even more comfortable. His originally restless soul calmed down a little bit. This was like a restless person being injected with a tranquilizer. The effect was amazing. Li Xiaotian waved her hand, and the Heavenly Emperor actually flew towards her as lightly as a feather. The Heavenly Emperor did not seem to have much strength to resist. This was the weakness of the soul. Although the Emperor of Heaven was very powerful, if he was only left with a wisp of soul, then his 1,000 years of cultivation would be greatly reduced. Although it was stronger than the average soul, compared to a human with good strength, he was still at a disadvantage. Chapter 1470. Tang Zheng looked into Li Xiaotian's eyes and understood what she meant. Protect the Emperor of Heaven's soul well and help him return to life in the future. Although he didn't get along with the Emperor of Heaven, the other party was the Empyrean fairy's father after all. Naturally, he couldn't neglect him. Li Xiaotian nodded slightly, understanding Tang Zheng's meaning. She quickly cast a spell and a golden light soared into the sky, enveloping the Emperor of Heaven's soul. Immediately, the Emperor of Heaven felt that all the yang energy was blocked outside the door, as if a barrier was firmly protecting him. He understood that this was Li Xiaotian using a special divine ability to protect his soul, so he didn't have to worry about his soul dissipating. Li Xiaotian took out a porcelain bottle and with a hook of his finger, the Emperor of Heaven's soul flew into the bottle. The Empyrean fairy watched all of this without blinking. In the end, she let out a sigh of relief, knowing that her father was fine for the time being. She looked at Li Xiaotian with a complicated expression, not knowing how he had become so powerful. Here, take it. Li Xiaotian handed the porcelain bottle to the Empyrean fairy. The Empyrean fairy was slightly startled, but she immediately put it into her pocket. Thank you. She nodded heavily at Li Xiaotian and said gratefully. Li Xiaotian smiled indifferently. His gaze fell on Yan Qingyi and he asked Tang Zheng, what do we do with her? Tang Zheng narrowed his eyes and stared at Yan Qingyi with a burning gaze. He said meaningfully, Yan Qingyi is no longer the same as before. Even the Emperor of Heaven had to escape from her body. The inner demons might not be able to gain any benefits. Is that so? Li Xiaotian and the Empyrean fairy were both skeptical. Tang Zheng had obtained the heavenly book inheritance. He had a premonition that Yan Qingyi's gains in the gate of heaven would not be worse than his. That was why she had such a huge leap in strength. It was because of this that he dared to make such a claim. As if to confirm Tang Zheng's speculation, a sharp whistle came from Yan Qingyi's body. This was clearly the sound of the inner demons, and it was filled with fear and unease. The shrieking sound came to an abrupt end, as if someone had forcefully grabbed its throat. Yan Qingyi's hair and beard were fluttering in the wind. His entire body was emitting an extremely sharp aura, which was completely different from his previous indifferent aura. Tang Zheng's eyes flashed with a bright light as he stared at her without blinking. She's changed, she's really changed. He sighed in his heart. Is it over? Another question floated in his heart. Yan Qingyi's hair fell down, and her expression became indifferent again. However, everyone looked at her differently. They did not dare to judge her based on their previous knowledge. She gave Tang Zheng a deep look and walked towards him confidently. Tang Zheng understood that the battle between Yan Qingyi and the inner demons had already come to an end. The inner demons were most likely doomed. The inner demons that Qi Yu and the Emperor could not kill had fallen at the hands of Yan Qingyi? Tang Zheng was not sure. In fact, the inner demons had not completely fallen. They had only been suppressed by Yan Qingyi using the great power of the heavenly way. The inner demons were content to stay in a corner. They were curled up in a very small area in Yan Qingyi's brain. Yan Qingyi wanted to go one step further. She wanted to destroy the inner demons and completely eliminate this huge hidden danger. However, she did not have the strength. Although she had suppressed the inner demons, it was impossible for her to completely destroy them with her current strength. Yan Qingyi decided not to waste her efforts. She had comprehended the heavenly way. It was not so easy for the inner demons to jump around. The poor inner demons had run rampant for so many years, but in the end, they had been suppressed by Yan Qingyi. He was probably so angry that he was vomiting blood. Yan Qingyi stood in front of Tang Zheng. Their eyes met. Yan Qingyi spoke first. The matter has been resolved. What about the inner demons? Tang Zheng asked. He won't be able to jump around for the time being. Yan Qingyi did not mince her words. Tang Zheng understood that this sentence meant that the inner demons were not dead. He had mixed feelings and did not forget to remind her. The inner demons are cunning and powerful. You must be careful of them. Understood. Thank you for the reminder. Then what do you plan to do from now on? Tang Zheng could not see through Yan Qingyi. He might as well ask directly. Yan Qingyi smiled mysteriously and said, I've already realized the dream I've always had. Next, of course I'm going to realize my new dream. New dream? Tang Zheng raised his voice curiously. Yan Qingyi nodded. She did not explain her new dream. Instead, she pointed at the 100 Faces Star Sovereign and said, I'll leave him to you. Tang Zheng looked at the 100 Faces Star Sovereign. He was not dead and had returned to his true form. His short stature was no different from a child's. His feelings toward the 100 Faces Star Sovereign were very complicated. After all, they had known each other for a long time and had always been enemies. The 100 Faces Star Sovereign was extremely daring. He actually killed the chief and pretended to be him. He definitely had an ulterior motive. This time, if not for the coincidence that caused his plan to fail, the impact it would have in the future would be immeasurable. It's up to you whether to kill him or not. Yan Qingyi's tone was indifferent, as if she did not care at all. Tang Zheng did not know how to deal with him at the moment. He simply waved his hand and put him into Sumeru world. Yan Qingyi turned around and left. Very quickly, she walked out. An invisible force burst forth from her body. Even with so many soldiers and police around her, they couldn't stop her. They automatically parted to both sides, making a path for her. What is her dream? Li Xiaotian stared in the direction where Yan Qingyi disappeared, and could not hold back his curiosity as he asked. Tang Zheng's head moved slightly, and said, he has always been comprehending the so-called Great Tao. Perhaps she has already comprehended the Great Tao that she has always dreamed of. As he said this, he subconsciously stopped and thought of the fortuitous encounter in the gate of heaven. He understood the heavenly book and came into contact with the heavenly Tao. But all this time, he had never had a deeper understanding of the heavenly Tao. It was as if the heavenly Tao was useless to him. Could it be that Yan Qingyi had truly comprehended the heavenly Tao? He decided that when he returned, he would definitely have a good chat with the Emperor of Heaven. He then looked at the place where Qi Yu was buried and opened his palm. A storage magic treasure and war soul sword were quietly lying in his palm. This was the spoils of war that he had found on Qi Yu's body before burying him. He gently brushed past the war soul sword, and the war soul sword let out a high-pitched cry. He was extremely familiar with this sword. He had personally witnessed the war soul sword's advancement step by step, and in the end, it had become a sacred artifact. He looked at the war soul sword, then looked at the hidden profound sword, and had an idea. He had extraordinary feelings for these two swords, and since the war soul sword had returned to his hands, he naturally would not favor one and discriminate against the other. Thus, he had an idea. Could he combine these two swords into one? If the two sacred artifacts were combined into one, what kind of scene would that be, and what kind of divine weapon would it refine? He could not imagine it, but he was ready to make a move. Mo Xia is still in the Sumeru world. He is a master refiner. I can ask for his opinion later. He made up his mind. His attention once again fell on the storage magic treasure. This was a heaven-grade magic treasure. Although it was not a sacred artifact, as a storage magic treasure, reaching the level of a heaven-grade magic treasure was already rare and precious. With a thought, he entered the storage magic treasure and was immediately attracted by an item. To read the latest novel, please visit the website. Chapter 1471. This thing firmly attracted Tang Zheng's attention, and he subconsciously cheered, Heaven and Earth Mystic Stone. Back then, under the Tree of Life, Qiyu took away a portion of the Heaven and Earth Mystic Stone, and the rest were all kept by Tang Zheng in Sumeru world. Now that he saw the Heaven and Earth Mystic Stone again, he had gathered 99 of them and could rebuild the stairway to heaven. In this way, not only could he open the spatial door to travel to heavens beyond, he could even bring many people with him to heavens beyond. He suppressed the excitement in his heart and moved the Heaven and Earth Mystic Stone into Sumeru world. As for the other things in the storage magic treasure, they were not ordinary items, and there were many refining magic treasures. This must be the preparation work of Qi Yu to equip his team in the future. However, now that Tang Zheng had taken advantage of him, how could he not take it? After cleaning up the spoils of war, Tang Zheng looked around and found that many military police had gathered in the distance. This time, the movement was too big, and the whole world knew about it. It was impossible for the officials to hide the existence of the cultivators. This world was probably going to change. However, this was not the problem he was worried about. As for the death of the leader, he was not worried. The officials' ability to deal with the aftermath was already perfect, and there must be a way to deal with it. After this battle, the officials would completely stop and would not target him. The next leader would even try his best to rope him in. Let's go. Tang Zheng called out and summoned the somersault cloud. The few of them rode the cloud and flew away from everyone's heads. The others watched them ride the cloud and fly away, and no one stopped them. Not long after, Tang Zheng pressed the cloud and landed outside his villa. The witch tribesmen immediately surrounded him. They did not know that Tang Zheng had faked his death, so when they suddenly saw the great envoy, they were all shocked. Tang Zheng comforted them and explained a few words. The witch tribesmen cheered and understood the good intentions of the great envoy. They were all greatly encouraged and were overjoyed as if it was the new year. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Suddenly, a few ear-piercing sounds came from afar, causing their nerves to tighten and they all turned their heads to look. When they saw clearly, they heaved a sigh of relief at the same time. It turned out to be Tian Chanzi and the others who had flown back from afar. Previously, when the great battle began, they had quietly lurked not far away from the inner courtyard and witnessed the great battle from afar. This battle was very intense, but it didn't last long. Before they could react, the battle was already over. Tian Chanzi looked at Tang Zheng with a complicated expression. He punched him in the chest and said emotionally, "You brat, you really want to scare people to death by making such a big scene." For someone of Tian Chanzi's experience to say such words, it was obvious that the shock of this battle was too great for him. Tang Zheng smiled bitterly. "I had no choice. If Qi Yu and Ji Wuxiang hadn't come to Beijing, I wouldn't have thought that things would end up like this." "What happened to those two?" Tian Chanzi asked curiously. Tang Zheng's face sank and he said in a dignified tone, "Qi Yu died and Ji Wuxiang escaped. Now, our biggest enemy is Ji Wuxiang." Ji Wuxiang. Tian Chanzi's tone became heavier as he repeated this name. His two eyebrows seemed to knit together. He really is a difficult guy to deal with. It had to be said that even with Tian Chanzi's insight, he still misjudged Ji Wuxiang. He didn't expect that Ji Wuxiang would come to this point. "What about that girl from the Yan family?" Tian Chanzi hesitated for a moment before asking another key question. He had seen Yan Qingyi's valiant and heroic appearance from afar, so he asked this question. "She." Tang Zheng hesitated for a moment. "I can't say for now, but I believe there will be a result soon." Tang Zheng believed that after asking about the soul of the Emperor of Heaven, he would definitely gain something. Tian Chanzi looked at him deeply and didn't continue asking. At this time, the people in the villa all came out. Fang Shishir, Yi Dingdang, Lu Qingmei, Mu Hongyan, Wu, and the others all stood at the door. Their eyes were red as they stared at him. They didn't even try to hide the deep feelings in their eyes. The battle this time was too intense. Their hearts were in their throats. Now that they saw Tang Zheng return safe and sound, how could they control their emotions? They didn't care about being shy. In front of their beloved, the shyness in their hearts couldn't withstand a single blow. They were completely defeated by their true feelings. "Tang Zheng!" Fang Shishir cried out. Like a gust of wind, she directly threw herself into Tang Zheng's embrace. In the blink of an eye, the other women also made their move. They were as quiet as a virgin, but as agile as a fleeing rabbit. Bang bang bang. Tang Zheng felt like he was being hit by a huge rock. He was completely overwhelmed by the few people. After experiencing the battle just now, he didn't have the slightest bit of stage fright. But when he saw the battle in front of him, his heart panicked. He staggered and actually fell to the ground. "Ah!" A few delicate cries sounded out. The few of them pressed Tang Zheng under their bodies. Then, they suddenly woke up and looked at each other in dismay. They were incomparably embarrassed. Although they were gradually aware of each other's relationship, they didn't expect to completely expose each other's relationship. Especially Mu Hongyan, who had always had an underground relationship with Tang Zheng. Now, wouldn't it be completely exposed? Mu Hongyan wished that she could find a hole to hide in, but when she recalled the soul-stirring battle just now, she wished that she could lean on Tang Zheng's side for a while longer. Seeing that, Tian Chanzi and the Shaman clan members all revealed meaningful smiles. The Shaman clan members all turned around, not wanting to see anything indecent. Tang Zheng was pressed down by the soft body. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and said resentfully, "Can we get up first?" Only then did the few women stand up. They all glared at him, as if to say that it was all his fault. Tang Zheng wanted to cry, but no tears came out. "I didn't do anything, how could this have anything to do with me?" Tang Zheng stood up, patted his clothes, and said guiltily, "Everyone is too enthusiastic, I'm flattered." Everyone returned to the villa and sat down. The few women secretly looked at each other from time to time, their eyes revealing a thought-provoking look. For a moment, the atmosphere in the living room was somewhat awkward. Tang Zheng coughed and broke the silence with a thick face. He said, "Let me first introduce what happened today." He explained the course of the battle in a concise and comprehensive manner. Immediately, everyone was firmly attracted by this content and forgot the awkwardness just now. When Tang Zheng finished, there was silence. No one spoke. They were completely immersed in the battle. Tang Zheng glanced around and also remained silent, giving them time to react and reflect. After a while, Tian Chanzi said, "Then our top priority is to find Ji Wuxiang. Don't give him a chance to make a comeback." Tang Zheng nodded and said in a deep voice, "Dianan is his nest. The last time I made a big scene in Dianan, it had a big impact on them. Now that Ji Wuxiang has been defeated, it is still unknown whether he will return to Dianan. Whether he returns to Dianan or not, we must go to Dianan." Tian Chanzi insisted. Tang Zheng looked at him deeply and said, "I agree. If he does not return to Dianan, then we must destroy his power in Dianan. In addition, what about Yan Qingyi?" Li Xiaotian had seen Yan Qingyi's power with his own eyes, so he directly asked this question. Tang Zheng fell into silence. After a while, he said, "After I ask the Emperor of Heaven, I will go to the Yan family." Everyone understood that the top priority was to ask the Emperor of Heaven. In addition, Tang Zheng had one more thing to do, and that was to integrate the two divine weapons, and then go to Dianan. Dianan was Ji Wuxiang's nest. It was deeply rooted, and he had set up the celestial chess. The celestial chess in Dianan was not like the one in the capital. It was a fully matured celestial chess, not an incomplete version. Its power could not be mentioned in the same breath. Tang Zheng also did not have absolute confidence that he could defeat Ji Wuxiang, who had the celestial chess. Therefore, he must be fully prepared, and a divine weapon was one of the preparations. In addition, he gained a lot from this battle. Not only did he comprehend a new sword move, but his power was also restless, and there seemed to be signs of a breakthrough. Especially the new move of man and sword as one, it seemed to have opened the door to a new world for him. It turned out that he could also comprehend such a shocking move, which gave him great encouragement and confidence. He was ready to continue and create a set of sword moves, which would be even more powerful. Of course, he would not give up on the Taiji two forms swordsmanship. He had not completely understood this set of sword moves, and there were still many essences in it. If he completely understood it, it would be beneficial for him to create new moves. Time was of the essence, and Tang Zheng did not have time to waste. Therefore, he signaled to the Empyrean fairy. She understood and took out a small porcelain bottle. Li Xiaotian hooked his finger, and the small porcelain bottle flew up and floated in the air. "Come out!" Tang Zheng shouted. Li Xiaotian cast a spell, and a wisp of yin qi floated out of the porcelain bottle. The souls of heaven and earth also flew out of the bottle along with the yin qi. Ordinary souls could not be seen with the naked eye, but the Emperor of Heaven was different. His soul was extremely strong, and with the support of Li Xiaotian's special mana, everyone could see him with the naked eye. Many people saw this for the first time, and they all stared with wide eyes, unable to hide their curiosity. So this is a soul. Yi Dingdang clicked her tongue in wonder, "Can my soul be like this too?" Tang Zheng gave her a bitter smile and said, "Your soul is not as strong as the Emperor of Heaven's. If you want to do this, I'm afraid your soul will scatter." Yi Dingdang shrunk her neck and quickly waved her hand, "Then forget it, I don't want to do this." Yi Dingdang's focus was on the soul, while Wu and Fang Shishir looked at Li Xiaotian at the same time. The two of them had high cultivations, and their minds were relatively meticulous, so they immediately saw through Li Xiaotian's problem. For her to be able to do this, it was enough to show that her strength was unfathomable. This was equivalent to giving them a huge pressure. Emperor of Heaven looked around, and it was also the first time he saw Tang Zheng's huge camp. The experienced and knowledgeable Emperor of Heaven immediately saw through the unusual relationship between Tang Zheng and the few women, and said straightforwardly, "No wonder you rejected my daughter's engagement. So it turns out that you were hiding a mistress in a golden house, and have so many close female friends." Emperor of Heaven's words were shocking, and directly pointed out the relationship between Tang Zheng and the girls, causing the atmosphere to become subtle. Many people who did not go to the gate of heaven and did not know the inside story subconsciously looked at the Empyrean fairy, and exclaimed in their hearts, "What, the Emperor of Heaven actually wants to matchmake Tang Zheng and the Empyrean fairy?" No, Absolutely not. To read a novel without mistakes, please visit Chapter 1472. The girls could tolerate each other, but if the Empyrean fairy also joined in, then they would be greatly threatened. After all, the Empyrean fairy's strength was too great and could be of great help to Tang Zheng. If the two of them were to walk together, then what would they do? Thus, they all stared at the Empyrean fairy with burning gazes, and their gazes became thought-provoking. Facing the Emperor of Heaven's teasing, Tang Zheng deliberately pretended not to hear and changed the topic, saying, Emperor of Heaven, regarding Yan Qingyi, I have a few questions to ask you. Hearing the three words Yan Qingyi, the Emperor of Heaven's attention was indeed attracted. He stared straight at Tang Zheng and asked in a deep voice, What questions do you have? How did Yan Qingyi become so powerful? Is it related to the heavenly Tao? Tang Zheng went straight to the point. The Emperor of Heaven pondered for a moment and said, Your eyesight is not bad, to actually see so many clues. Tang Zheng's head moved and asked, Then it seems that I was right? The Emperor of Heaven said bluntly, Yes, you guessed right. Everything that she has today is related to the heavenly Tao. Now that I think about it carefully, her fortuitous encounters in the gate of heaven surpassed yours, which is why she has today's achievements. Why? Tang Zheng asked doubtfully, Didn't she and I both inherit Fuxi's Tao intent? In the gate of heaven, Tang Zheng and Yan Qingyi both received Tao intent inheritances from Fuxi's statue, but this Tao intent did not have much use for Tang Zheng. Obviously, Yan Qingyi was different. The Emperor of Heaven said bluntly, Ancestor Fuxi's Tao will also came from comprehending the heavenly Tao. The Tao will pass down by the ancestor is more of a medium that allows you to use the heavenly book to comprehend the heavenly Tao. Only the heavenly Tao that you comprehend yourself is the most useful to you. Tang Zheng was enlightened. So that was the case. But the Emperor of Heaven changed the topic. The Tao insight that Yan Qingyi inherited seems to be completely different. She seems to have directly obtained the heavenly Tao, and not the Tao insight of her ancestors. What? Tang Zheng exclaimed and stood up immediately. His heart was in turmoil. How could he not be surprised? Fuxi's Tao insight was worlds apart from the heaven's Tao insight. He had personally experienced it, so he was very clear about the gap between the two. If someone else said this, he would definitely scoff at it and think it was nonsense. But this was said by the Emperor of Heaven, so he couldn't doubt it. After all, the Emperor of Heaven had comprehended the heavenly Tao for over 1,000 years, and he understood the heavenly Tao far better than Tang Zheng. These words weren't spoken without reason, and there was real evidence. Even though the others knew nothing about the heavenly Tao, they realized the seriousness of the problem, and they all revealed astonished expressions as they looked at the Emperor of Heaven with dumbstruck expressions. The Emperor of Heaven looked around and took in the reaction of everyone, and he sighed faintly. Even though I don't want to admit it, but the truth is like this. Yan Qingyi has inherited the true heavenly Tao. The emotions in his words were self-evident. He'd comprehended the heavenly Tao all his life, and he was the successor of the Fuxi clan, but he never imagined that the heavenly Tao would choose an outsider. He had comprehended the heavenly Tao for a long time, and he already understood that the heavenly Tao had its own consciousness and thoughts. The heavenly Tao had chosen Yan Qingyi and not him, so the blow to him was self-evident. Tang Zheng fell into silence. Yan Qingyi had inherited the heavenly Tao, so her attitude towards him had undergone a tremendous change. He didn't know if Yan Qingyi would view him as an enemy, causing both sides to become enemies. He took a deep breath and comforted himself that his worries were groundless. If Yan Qingyi had really become enemies, then perhaps both sides would already be in a life and death situation, and wouldn't be at peace like this. But the heavenly Tao's choice was still something he couldn't understand. He stared straight at the Emperor of Heaven and asked curiously, Then do you know why the heavenly Tao chose Yan Qingyi? The Emperor of Heaven rolled his eyes at him and said, I also want to know. Tang Zheng was helpless and resentfully said, Then it seems that I really need to pay a visit to Yan Qingyi and find out her actual situation. The Yan family and Tang Zheng's relationship was not shallow. Both sides had helped each other and walked together for such a long time, so Tang Zheng really didn't want to have animosity with the Yan family and become enemies. When the time comes, it's best if you bring me along. I also want to meet her. The Emperor of Heaven volunteered. Tang Zheng nodded and remembered it in his heart. Since he couldn't figure out Yan Qingyi's actual situation, then he had to be fully prepared when he went to see her. He couldn't just go rashly. I must immediately fuse with those two divine swords. Tang Zheng secretly clenched his teeth. The most important thing right now was to increase his fighting strength as much as possible. As night fell, the lights in the villa were extinguished. Everyone returned to their own rooms to rest. Because Tang Zheng's relationship with the girls was exposed, he was left with nothing to do. No one dared to sneak into Tang Zheng's room under the watchful eyes of others. If they were seen by others, then it wouldn't be good. After all, there were several pairs of eyes staring at Tang Zheng's room. Even the slightest movement of grass in the wind couldn't escape these pairs of fiery eyes. What, you want to fuse with the two divine swords? Mo Xie's cry of surprise exploded in Tang Zheng's ears like a clap of thunder. It was as if he was even more shocked than when he heard the news of Qi Yu's death. He didn't think that Mo Xie's attitude would be so big. He asked in astonishment, "What's wrong with that?" Mo Xie said without hesitation, "Of course not. You're really indulging in fantasy. You don't know how big of a risk this is. You've already obtained all the refining methods from me, so you should know that refining isn't just a matter of adding two magical treasures together. This isn't a matter of 1 + 1 = 2. Refining is a complex and profound study. How can you take it for granted?" Mo Xie's speech didn't dispel Tang Zheng's thoughts. He hesitated slightly before continuing, "There's nothing absolute in this world. If you don't try, how do you know it won't work?" Mo Xie coldly snorted and said, "This kind of thing can be known just by thinking about it. What's the use of trying? If by any chance you destroy the two divine tools, wouldn't that be a waste of heaven's gifts?" Tang Zheng had deep feelings for the two swords. He wanted to have them both, so fusing them together was the best choice. He persisted in his view and firmly said, "No matter if it succeeds or not, I still want to try. I won't go crazy with you." Mo Xie refused without hesitation. Tang Zheng understood that Mo Xie couldn't provide him with any experience or good advice. This was because this was beyond his ability and even beyond his knowledge. He could only rely on himself to explore. What Tang Zheng was least afraid of was fumbling around. After all, he had spent most of his time fumbling around. Mo Xie looked deeply at Tang Zheng a few times. He couldn't calm his emotions and couldn't help but think of what Tang Zheng said about Qi Yu's death. He felt as if he had lost something. He, or perhaps everyone in the Yellow Emperor tribe, had fought with Qi Yu for so long. At first, they all thought that Qi Yu was dead, but he came back to life. Mo Xie was deeply aware of how cunning and tenacious Qi Yu was. When he heard the news of his death, he felt that it was especially unreal. He carefully thought about it for a while. In the end, he couldn't hold back the question in his heart and asked %3a, "Are you sure that Qi Yu is dead?" "I saw it with my own eyes." "How could it be fake?" Tang Zheng asked back. "Even if you saw it with your own eyes, it might not be all true," Mo Xie retorted. Hearing his doubts, Tang Zheng rolled his eyes speechlessly and said, "It doesn't matter if you believe it or not. Anyway, I'm just telling you." Mo Xie was suddenly startled. He muttered as if in a dream, "Could it be that he's really dead? An enemy who had always been there suddenly died." This was really hard to accept immediately. Tang Zheng simply ignored him. He took out the War Spirit Sword and the Hidden Profound Sword. As if sensing his mood, the two swords let out a buzzing sword sound. His fingers gently brushed the sword body. The sword sound became even more resounding and hurried. It seemed to be cheering and impatient. "Master, I will lend you a hand." The Hidden Profound Sword spirit volunteered. Tang Zheng smiled knowingly, "All right, then let's try it out together. If anything happens to you later, immediately inform me. He waved his hand and the 9 revolving pill furnace appeared out of thin air, floating half a meter away from him. The 9 revolving pill furnace had already been upgraded to a sacred weapon. However, its weapon spirit was hidden in the spirit on the walls of the furnace. True fire. Tang Zheng shouted in a low voice. A ball of true fire emerged from his fingertips and flew into the 9 revolving pill furnace, burning fiercely. Whoosh! The war spirit sword flew into the 9 revolving pill furnace. Although the furnace was small, there was a universe inside. It could completely contain the war spirit sword. The true fire moved upon hearing the sound and immediately enveloped the war spirit sword. The sword body immediately shone with the light of the true fire, appearing somewhat mysterious. Although the true fire was powerful, the war spirit sword was a sacred weapon. It could not be refined with just a little true fire. This required Tang Zheng to use his refining divine ability in order to refine the war spirit sword with the true fire. He immediately activated the refining divine ability that Mo Xie had taught him. With a whoosh, the flames soared and completely occupied the interior of the 9 revolving pill furnace. Weng weng. The war spirit sword seemed to have sensed something and immediately began to tremble. The sword body slowly turned red. Once the sword body turned red, it would soften little by little and the impurities within it would be stripped away. Although the war spirit sword was a sacred weapon, it would still have impurities. It was just that the amount was very small. In the past, Tang Zheng's refining divine ability was not very profound, so he had no way to refine the war spirit sword. However, it was different now. If he wanted to fuse the 2 divine swords, he would need to extract the essence of the 2 swords. Only then would he be able to refine an even more powerful divine weapon. The war spirit sword softened and the sword body turned into flowing water. It actually melted into a ball. Traces of impurities were like gas, evaporating from the ball and being sucked out of the furnace. The ball became smaller and smaller, but the essence it contained became denser and denser. Just by looking at it, one could see the difference. Tang Zheng was overjoyed. This could be considered as a success for the first step. He activated his divine ability and decided to take the next step. Just at this moment, a hole opened in the ball and something floated out. Chapter 1473. The 2 of them were attracted by the thing that came out of the small ball as they stared at it. This is... Tang Zheng hesitated for a moment before shouting out, "This is a strand of soul." "It's a soul," Mo Xie said with certainty. With their eyes, they naturally wouldn't mistake the soul. Could it be a sword spirit? Tang Zheng asked the question in his heart. Mo Xie's eyes flickered as if he was deep in thought. After a while, he said, "I have never seen a sword spirit before, so I cannot say for sure." Although Mo Xie had refined a saint artifact before, and the saint artifact had an artifact spirit, he had never separated the artifact spirit from the saint artifact before. Therefore, he was unable to determine whether this strand of soul was the battle soul sword's artifact spirit and sword soul. "Then what should I do?" Tang Zheng asked, not knowing what to do. Mo Xie rolled his eyes and spread out his hands, saying, "You're asking me, but who should I ask? I'm afraid that since ancient times, no one has been as reckless as you and was willing to merge 2 saint weapons into one. So, I can't give you an answer to your question. You decide for yourself." Hearing Mo Xie's words, Tang Zheng could only smile bitterly. He had already expected to encounter a problem, but he didn't expect it to be this problem. Since there was no ready answer, he would have to figure it out himself. Man proposes, but God disposes. He took a deep breath and stared at the strand of soul, saying, "Sword spirit, when you merged with the battle soul, there must be a part of the battle soul's soul in here. Since we are old acquaintances, I, Tang Zheng, will give it a try today." He carefully circulated his energy as he tried to guide the sword spirit. However, just as his chi was about to touch the sword spirit seemed to have been stimulated and immediately became restless. It rushed left and right as if it wanted to rush out of the 9 revolving pill furnace. Be careful. Mo Xia hurriedly warned. Tang Zheng's heart trembled as he naturally wouldn't let the sword spirit succeed. He immediately circulated his energy to seal the opening of the furnace. The sword spirit hit the seal and bounced back. The sword's soul didn't give up. Instead, it became abnormally restless, as if it had gone mad. It fiercely attacked the seal over and over again, tirelessly. Don't let it continue like this. It will damage the sword spirit. Mo Xia clenched his fists as if he was the one refining the weapon. He was extremely nervous. Tang Zheng nodded heavily. I understand. However, there was nothing he could do. The sword spirit was a wisp of a soul, and he couldn't completely confine it. He was deeply afraid that if he hurt it, it would affect the subsequent refining process. But letting him continue like this wasn't a solution either. The sword soul is a soul, so how can we deal with it? He racked his brains and racked his brains. Suddenly, he had a flash of inspiration. The Ksitigarbha Sutra is a sharp weapon against souls. In the ghost realm, so many ghosts have been purified by the Ksitigarbha Sutra. Can the Ksitigarbha Sutra also purify sword souls? When he thought of this, he immediately chanted the Ksitigarbha Sutra. Golden Sanskrit words flew out of his mouth and flew towards the sword spirit. No one knew that there was a different world within the sword spirit. The hidden mysteries were simply difficult to detect with the naked eye. In addition to the sword spirit, another wisp of soul was struggling with all its might. It was extremely anxious. Has Tang Zheng lost his mind? He is actually willing to destroy a sacred weapon to refine a more powerful magic weapon. This is really a fantasy. This was Qi Yu's voice, but no one heard the soul's silent criticism. No one would have thought that Qi Yu, a crafty rabbit with 3 burrows, did not completely disappear. Instead, at the last moment, he secretly put the last wisp of his soul into his magic weapon, the War Soul Sword. Qi Yu's soul was hidden in the sword spirit. The sword spirit was his best disguise, and no one would discover it. After all, in almost everyone's eyes, Qi Yu was already dead. Tens of thousands of years ago, during the Battle of Zhuolu, he was able to leave his life behind under the eyes of the Yellow Emperor and escape without a trace. Not to mention, it was even easier for him to leave a wisp of his soul under the eyes of Tang Zheng. If Tang Zheng knew about this, he would definitely be dumbfounded. After all, he had personally witnessed Qi Yu's death, but Qi Yu had still deceived everyone. After Qi Yu discovered that the War Soul Sword had been destroyed, he knew that he could not continue hiding. He had to take advantage of the fact that Tang Zheng and Mo Xia had not discovered him and escape. Otherwise, with his current soul form, many people could easily kill him. In addition, seeing Mo Xia and Tang Zheng together, Qi Yu was also furious. It turned out that the two of them had actually hooked up with each other. It was truly beyond his expectations. Qi Yu wanted to escape, but when he saw the golden Sanskrit words one after another, he was immediately shocked. Ksitigarbha Sutra. He knew how powerful the Ksitigarbha Sutra was, and he also knew that the Ksitigarbha Sutra was the key to restraining souls. He was only a wisp of soul, how could he contend against the Ksitigarbha Sutra? He really wanted to immediately appear and stop Tang Zheng's reckless actions. But if he appeared, his plan to fake his death would fail, and all his efforts would be wasted. He absolutely could not allow this to happen. He could only clench his teeth and think to himself, I'll go all out, at this time, I only have a sliver of hope. I hope that the Ksitigarbha Sutra is not too powerful, and I can luckily escape this calamity. Qi Yu felt lucky and decided to give it a try, leaving it up to fate. Tang Zheng was completely unaware that Qi Yu was still in this wisp of soul. He only hoped that he could use the Ksitigarbha Sutra to purify the sword soul, thus pacifying the sword soul and allowing it to become one with the mysterious hidden sword. The Sanskrit words wrapped around the sword soul, and the sword soul's restless emotions immediately calmed down. It no longer dashed left and right, but instead trembled non-stop in the 9 revolving Dan furnace, as if it was resisting the Ksitigarbha Sutra. The sword soul was not immediately subdued by the Ksitigarbha Sutra, but Tang Zheng immediately increased his strength. The Sanskrit Vajra shone and turned into a golden kasaya that covered the sword soul. This golden kasaya was very small, but its power was not ordinary. The sword soul's attack immediately weakened, as if it was suppressed by the golden kasaya. Chi Yu was suffering. He really wanted to shout and complain about Tang Zheng's actions, but he could only silently curse, "Tang Zheng, how is your Ksitigarbha Sutra so powerful? Damn it, this is all Dizang of Goguryu's fault. Why did he impart the Ksitigarbha Sutra to this brat? Now I've suffered so much." The Ksitigarbha Sutra's power grew stronger and stronger. Chi Yu was only a remnant soul, his strength was not strong, so he had no way to resist the Ksitigarbha Sutra. His consciousness became fuzzy. "No, I can't be converted by the Ksitigarbha Sutra. This brat wants to turn me into his sword soul, how can I let him do as he wishes?" Chi Yu was extremely unwilling. But he did not have the slightest ability to resist. He was like a leaf floating in the sea, unable to resist. Seeing that the Ksitigarbha Sutra was effective, Tang Zheng let out a sigh of relief. Fortunately, he had the Ksitigarbha Sutra's help, otherwise he would not have been able to suppress the sword soul, and then the two swords would not have been able to fuse successfully. Mo Xie stared at this scene without blinking, as Tang Zheng's every move did not escape his eyes. Witnessing his success, the shock in Mo Xie's heart could be imagined, and he was speechless for a long time. Tang Zheng did not delay. With a thought, the hidden profound sword also entered the 9 revolving Dan furnace, preparing to fuse the two swords. To read the latest novel, please visit the website. Chapter 1474. After the hidden profound sword was thrown into the 9 revolving pill furnace, the true fire did not immediately wrap around it. Instead, a figure flashed at the door and Li Xiaotian appeared in the room. Previously, Tang Zheng was worried that an accident would occur during the smelting of the battle soul sword, so he purposely let Li Xiaotian wait outside the room. Now that there was no danger, it was time for her to use her skills. The hidden profound sword was made of 9 nether mysterious iron, so it had to be refined with ghost fire. Now that he wanted to refine the hidden profound sword again, he also needed ghost fire. Only Li Xiaotian could ignite the ghost fire, so naturally, he would need her help. Li Xiaotian had been waiting outside the door worriedly. After hearing Tang Zheng's call, she was overjoyed and knew that it was time for her to go on stage. Ever since she knew that Tang Zheng needed her ghost fire, she had been silently practicing controlling it. Now, her control of the ghost fire had reached perfection. She crossed her hands and a ball of blue ghost fire rose from her palm and flew into the 9 revolving pill furnace. Once the ghost fire arrived, the temperature in the furnace dropped by many degrees. Although the ghost fire was still fire, it was extremely cold and was very different from ordinary flames. Even if it was extremely cold, once the ghost fire touched the body, it could still burn the body. The taste was not any better than other flames. Tang Zheng and Mo Xie had seen the power of the ghost fire, so they immediately stared at Li Xiaotian. Li Xiaotian tightly guarded her mind. All of her thoughts were focused on the ghost fire and the hidden profound sword. The ghost fire wrapped around the hidden profound sword, but it did not resist. This was because the hidden profound sword and the battle soul sword were very different. The hidden profound sword was Tang Zheng's sword and was connected to his mind. The battle soul sword belonged to Chi Yu, so even if it became an ownerless item, it still had Chi Yu's imprint. Therefore, it naturally resisted external threats. The hidden profound sword was very compatible with Li Xiaotian. Not long later, it melted into a ball of essence, without the slightest shadow of a sword. However, what surprised Tang Zheng was that there was no soul that flew out of the hidden profound sword. Didn't the hidden profound sword also have a sword spirit? Why didn't the soul fly out? Tang Zheng and Mo Xie both opened their eyes wide, looking at this completely different scene. Looking at the hidden profound sword on the left and the war soul on the right, the two were indeed worlds apart. Tang Zheng was stunned and stammered, "What's going on?" The sword spirit of the hidden mystic sword had already understood Tang Zheng's astonishment and hurriedly said, "Master, I am one with the sword spirit of the hidden mystic sword." I cannot be separated from it at all. Then why did the war soul sword spirit separate? Tang Zheng asked subconsciously. The hidden sword hesitated for a moment and said, I don't know either. The gazes of the three involuntarily focused on the war soul sword. That ball of soul was especially eye-catching. If not for the Ksitigarbha Sutra suppressing it, it would have already slipped away. They didn't know that this was because of Qi Yu. The war soul sword spirit was mixed with a strand of Qi Yu's soul, which was why it could separate from the war soul sword's essence. A true sword spirit, or rather an artifact spirit, even if the saint artifact melted, the artifact spirit would still be wrapped within it, just like the hidden profound sword. Unless the sword spirit was mixed with another strong soul, the artifact spirit would be able to separate from the saint artifact. This kind of thing was unprecedented. They didn't have any reference, so they naturally couldn't guess the reason behind it. They could only stare. Tang Zheng took a deep breath, knowing that he couldn't delay at this juncture. The strangeness of the war soul sword could only be explored bit by bit in the future. We will begin the fusion immediately. Be careful. If there are any abnormalities, tell me immediately. Tang Zheng warned Li Xiaotian. Li Xiaotian nodded his head heavily. He secretly swore in his heart that he definitely couldn't drag Tang Zheng down. No matter what, he had to ensure that this fusion was successful. As a weapon refining master, Mo Xia had never seen such a scene before, so he opened his eyes wide and admired this once-in-a-lifetime scene. He didn't even dare to blink, afraid that he would miss any details. Fuse! Tang Zheng roared, and the essence of the two swords, under the control of the two of them, slowly moved closer to each other. One yin and one yang, the two flames also moved closer to each other. Puff! When the two flames came into contact with each other, they were actually annihilated, as if they had never appeared before. The few of them were shocked. Suddenly, a ray of light flashed through Tang Zheng's mind, as if a large door was slowly opening in front of him. Extreme yin gives birth to yin, extreme yin gives birth to yang. Yin and yang counter each other, annihilate each other. Yin and yang give birth to each other, forming the great Tao. This obscure and profound text was a passage in the heavenly book, and Tang Zheng remembered it very clearly. He didn't expect that it would jump out by itself, and it really gave him a shock. However, he immediately realized the profound meaning contained in this passage. He stared straight at the ghost fire and true fire that were annihilating each other, and suddenly understood. So that's how it is. The ghost fire and true fire, one yin and one yang, were supposed to counter each other. When the two came into contact, they would naturally annihilate each other. However, the heavenly book said that yin and yang could not only counter each other, they could also give birth to each other. This was the great Tao. Yin and yang give birth to each other, forming the great Tao. Tang Zheng muttered these words silently, his eyes staring at the annihilating flames. His eyes flashed, and he suddenly understood. Without any movement from him, the true fire and ghost fire changed. They met each other, but this time they didn't annihilate each other. Instead, they suddenly soared up and turned into a new ball of flame. There was purple and blue in this ball of flame, and they blended together. There was me and you and me, and you and me. It was exceptionally dazzling. What kind of flame is this? Mo Xia exclaimed. He was a master weapon refiner, and had a deep understanding of flames, but he had never seen such a flame before. In particular, the energy contained in it was definitely not just the superposition of the true fire and ghost fire. It was clearly more powerful than the superposition of these two flames. Li Xiaotian also opened his eyes wide. He was one of the people involved, so he had a deeper understanding. As for the ghost fire in the new ball of flame, she could no longer control it. She immediately realized that this was a new kind of flame. Without a doubt, all these changes were made by Tang Zheng, and it was definitely a good change. She looked at Tang Zheng in high spirits. The man she loved was indeed different from the rest, and he had actually created such a miracle. Tang Zheng felt it the most. He realized that this was the change caused by the great Tao mentioned in the heavenly book. The great Tao mentioned in the heavenly book was also the heavenly Tao. No wonder Yan Qingyi's strength improved by leaps and bounds. The heavenly Tao was indeed extraordinary. The heavenly Tao changed the flame and gave birth to this new kind of flame. He was very clear that this new kind of flame was more powerful and useful for weapon refinement. Moreover, it merged the attributes of the true fire and ghost fire. Therefore, in the future, there would definitely not be any problems when using this kind of flame to refine the 9 underworld mysterious iron. There was no need to trouble Yan Qingyi anymore. Since it's a flame transformed by the heavenly Tao, then let's call it the heavenly flame. Tang Zheng thought for a while and decided on the name of this new flame. More and more ghost fire and true fire collided, and turned into a new heavenly flame. Li Xiaotian was at a loss. He did not know whether to continue to ignite the new ghost fire or to stop. Tang Zheng was in control of the situation, and immediately noticed her situation. He said in time, "Stop first, don't use the ghost fire." Li Xiaotian heaved a sigh of relief and quickly stopped. He stood quietly at the side, admiring Tang Zheng's every move. When Mo Xie heard Tang Zheng's calm and steady tone, it was obvious that everything was under his control. He could not help but feel a little jealous. This kid was too magical. The few of them had their own thoughts, but none of them disturbed Tang Zheng. He continued to do his best, working hard for the final sprint. Combine. Tang Zheng roared, the heavenly flame wrapped around the 2 balls of essence, and even the war soul sword spirit was wrapped within. Under the tempering of the heavenly flame, a portion of the impurities were refined, and then the 2 balls of essence moved closer to each other and fused together. Hua! When the 2 balls of essence fused together, they immediately blossomed with a resplendent light. It was like a sun, illuminating the room. Mo Xia and Li Xiaotian subconsciously closed their eyes. This ball of light was too dazzling. The shock in Mo Xia's heart could be imagined. He had been refining for so many years, but he had never seen such a scene. The light gradually dissipated, and the few of them opened their eyes. They immediately discovered that the 2 balls of essence had completely fused together, becoming one. Tang Zheng was overjoyed. All that was left was to fuse the war soul sword spirit into the essence, and then forge the essence into a sword. He anxiously chanted the Ksitigarbha Sutra, the golden kasaya wrapped around the sword spirit, and slowly approached the essence. Qi Yu was suppressed by the Ksitigarbha Sutra, and his consciousness was already blurry. It was as if he had realized that the most dangerous time had arrived, and his consciousness actually woke up. Looking at the scene in front of him, Qi Yu's soul was almost scared out of its wits. He never thought that the situation would become so bad. He had already walked to the edge of the cliff, and if he took another step, he would be smashed into pieces. I don't want to be his sword spirit. I am Qi Yu, the master of the 9 Li tribe. How can I become a sword spirit and be controlled by others? Qi Yu was extremely unwilling, and fought back, using the last of his remaining strength to resist the Ksitigarbha Sutra. However, the Ksitigarbha Sutra specialized in dealing with souls. His resistance was like a few pebbles thrown into a lake, unable to create any ripples at all. Ah! At the last moment, he only had time to let out a scream before he was absorbed into the essence. Eh! Tang Zheng suddenly frowned. I think I heard a scream. But seeing that Mo Xia and Li Xiaotian didn't have the slightest reaction, he bitterly smiled, thinking that he was too nervous, so he was hearing things. He didn't take it to heart and threw himself into the final task. Now, he had to forge this essence into a sword. He was already familiar with this part of the job, so he easily controlled the heavenly fire to stretch the essence and develop it into the shape of a sword. As time passed, a sword gradually revealed itself. The sword's body was overflowing with light, emitting a powerful and mysterious aura. Especially the aura, it was completely different from the previous battle soul sword and hidden profound sword. Tang Zheng's mouth couldn't help but reveal a smile. The flowers, birds, fishes, Insects and all kinds of strange beasts on the 9 revolving pill furnace seemed to come alive, vivid and lifelike. These were all spirits, and the weapon spirit of the 9 revolving pill furnace was hidden among them. Who? Suddenly, one of the spirits flew towards the sword and merged into it. To read the latest novel, please visit the website. Chapter 1475. When a soul entered the sword immediately released a ball of light. When Tang Zheng saw this scene, he was shocked. Previously, when he used the 9 revolving pill furnace to refine treasures, these souls did not enter the treasures. For example, when he refined the hidden profound sword last time, this scene did not occur. What was going on? He could not figure it out and felt confused. He was a refiner, yet he could not figure out what was going on. Others would find it even harder to figure it out. Mo Xie's heart tightened and his eyes opened wide as if they were about to pop out of their sockets. He exclaimed, "How did you do this?" Tang Zheng smiled bitterly, "I also want to know." When the soul enters the sword's spirit will become even stronger. Moreover, after the divine weapon is refined, it will bring about an unimaginable change. Mo Xie asserted. Unimaginable change? What would that be? Tang Zheng's heart moved. He knew that Mo Xie would not speak without thinking. He was looking forward to what kind of change this would bring. Whoosh! Another soul was absorbed into the sword, causing the light to become even brighter. Something's wrong. Mo Xie immediately shouted. Tang Zheng's heart skipped a beat and he also realized that something was wrong. Mo Xie impatiently said, "If it was just a soul, then it would be fine." Looking at this situation, this sword seems to be actively absorbing souls. In other words, it can absorb a lot of souls. Tang Zheng's face sank. He obviously understood what this meant. This meant that all of the souls on the 9 revolving pill furnace could be absorbed into the sword. One of these souls was the 9 revolving pill furnace's spirit. If they were absorbed into the sword, then the 9 revolving pill furnace would be destroyed. Without a spirit, how could a saint weapon be called a saint weapon? Stop! Tang Zheng shouted. A soul flew out from the 9 revolving pill furnace. Just as it was about to enter the sword, it abruptly stopped. Yeah. No one had expected the spirit essence to stop just like that. It had stopped too strangely, too cleanly. That's not right. Why did you stop with just one sentence? Mo Xie tilted her head as if she had seen a ghost. Tang Zheng rolled his eyes at him and said, "Why can't it stop when I say so?" Although he said so, he was also muttering in his heart. Why did he stop at such a perfect moment? It was as if everything was really under his control. Could it be a sword spirit? Li Xiaotian said thoughtfully. Sword soul. Tang Zheng and Mo Xie felt their eyes light up as they stared at the sword. Could it be that the sword soul is really at work? In other words, the sword spirit is absorbing those souls. This is too ridiculous. He had never heard of an artifact spirit being able to absorb other soul essences, so he quickly looked at Mo Xie. Mo Xie read his thoughts and shook her head, "I've never heard of it either." If an artifact spirit absorbs other spirits, does that mean that the artifact spirit will become stronger? This should be beneficial to the sacred artifact, right? Tang Zheng thought for a while and muttered to himself. That's natural. Mo Xie looked at Tang Zheng enviously. If other people want to increase the artifact spirit of their own artifact, it's extremely difficult and almost impossible. But you actually found such a method. I really don't know why you have such good luck. Mo Xie had been refining for so many years, but he had never thought of such a method. In other words, he had never thought of such a method. Tang Zheng heard the deep meaning in Mo Xie's words and smiled indifferently. It was just luck. This was actually not luck, but because of Qi Yu. Because the sword spirit contained a strand of Qi Yu's soul, it produced such an unimaginable effect. Tang Zheng could already feel that the sword spirit was stronger than before. He knew that this was a good thing for him. As for whether the sword's spirit could absorb other soul essences, he could test it out in the future. But right now, he could not continue to absorb the soul essences. Under his control, the soul essences returned to the 9 revolving alchemy furnace and appeared vividly on the walls of the furnace. He focused all his energy on forging a new sword body. Not long after, the sword body was completely forged. It was no different from the previous hidden profound sword, only the color was different. The 9 Serenity's mysterious iron was completely black, but now the sword's color was black and there were 3 faint colors flowing within. Gold, purple, and blue. He immediately understood that this was the result of the golden Kasaya, true fire, and ghost fire fusing into the sword body, resulting in such a miraculous change. But these 3 colors were hidden within the black of the sword body and were not conspicuous. Lines and lines came out from the sword body and were deeply imprinted on the sword body. Sacred inscriptions. This was the key to why an artifact was a saint artifact. 3 straight sacred inscriptions ran across the sword body, from the hilt to the tip. It was very different from the previous sacred inscriptions. Mos's eyes were already fixed on it. His mouth was so wide open that it could fit an entire duck egg. There was a voice in his heart that was shouting in shock, "Sacred inscriptions, how can it be so simple?" Tang Zheng was very clear that the simplicity of the sacred inscriptions represented the strength of the saint artifact. The great Tao was simple, the simpler the sacred inscriptions, the more powerful the saint artifact. The previous hidden profound sword sacred inscriptions were much simpler. They were straight lines, but there were many of them. It was definitely not the 3 straight lines like now. Tang Zheng was also very surprised. He never thought that the hidden profound sword sacred inscriptions would become so simple. The 3 seemingly simple sacred inscriptions had an indescribable beauty in his eyes. The great Tao was simple, it was indeed so. At this moment, Tang Zheng deeply understood the profoundness of the sacred inscriptions. The simple 3 straight lines seemed to contain the various principles of heaven and earth. The great Tao was simple. This so-called great Tao is the heavenly Tao. The heavenly Tao emphasizes simplicity. The simpler it is, the greater the profoundness it contains. Simple things instead contain endless changes. This seems contradictory, but it is not contradictory at all. It is precisely because it is the simplest that it can have the most changes. Those things that seem complicated are actually very simple. Thousands of things, as long as there is a clue, it will be clear. On the other hand, simple things make people unable to start and are difficult to figure out. Unknowingly, Tang Zheng looked at the sacred inscriptions and had a deeper understanding of the heavenly Tao. He comprehended even more exquisite principles. This was the extraordinary part of the sacred inscriptions. Li Xiaotian did not understand the difference. He only looked at the 3 sacred inscriptions and felt that it was incomparably beautiful. It was simply more pleasing to the eye than many magnificent things in the world. Tang Zheng stared at the sacred inscriptions and suddenly had a thought, now there are only 3 sacred inscriptions left. If there is only 1 sacred inscriptions left, wouldn't it be even simpler? This thought was like a key that enlightened him. He instantly understood that the hidden profound sword sacred inscriptions still had room for improvement. Only by turning the sacred inscriptions into one would it be truly simple. At that time, the power of the hidden profound sword sacred inscriptions would truly reach its peak state. To read the latest novel, please visit the website.